Chapter 41. On the painting, the image of a middle-aged man with an elegant demeanor and a white beard came to life vividly on the paper. King Ian had kept this matter to himself because he wasn't entirely sure if the county magistrate of Nanhai County was Li Zihen's husband. However, as events unfolded, it seemed increasingly likely that the county magistrate of Nanhai County was Qinlang Chuan from Liushi village. After discussing with others present, the team leader sent someone to invite Qinlan. Fortunately, the team leader knew Ren Xiao, which facilitated the process. When Qinlan and her husband Ren Xiao arrived, Qinlan burst into tears upon seeing the portrait. The person depicted was her father. Despite this revelation, Qinlan still intended to keep this information from her mother, as the situation was not yet certain. According to third brother Feng, Qinlang Chuan had encountered some difficulties. He remembered Li Zihen's appearance but couldn't recall her name, which explained why third brother Feng knew Li Zihen's name but not her identity. After further discussions among them, it was decided that Ren Xiao would accompany the caravan south in a few days to personally meet the county magistrate of Nanhai. With the plans settled, though concerns lingered, Qinlan repeatedly thanked King Ian and held onto his hand gratefully. The team leader returned the silver they had received. For King Ian, he had done all he could. What came next had to be left to Qinlan and her husband. On their way back, King Ian hesitated before speaking to Chu Hinian. "I didn't mean to keep it from you. I just wasn't certain. I was afraid it might lead to nothing." Chu Hinian seemed ready to respond, but instead, he gazed at King Ian with his calm, serene eyes, like a tranquil lake. After a moment, he gently squeezed King Ian's wrist. Walking behind Chu Hinian, King Ian bit his lip. In that moment, he felt deeply connected to Chu Hinian, sensing the subtle shifts in his emotions. He wanted to ask questions but decided to wait for the right time to take the initiative. King Ian lowered his head, silently resolving that one day, when the time was right, he would confide all his secrets to Chu Hinian, his true past and the necessary concealments included. By the time they returned to the village, it was late. They hurried to the Lu family's house. Chu Hinian waited outside while King Ian delivered the items, exchanged a few words, and then headed back home. The Dragon Boat Festival arrived swiftly. King Ian held the ladder while Chu Hinian placed worm-repelling Artemisia and Calamus under the eaves of their house. They did the same for Li Zihen's house. During the festival, the two of them spent time at Li Zihen's place. Qinlan returned with her child and informed her mother that Ren Xiao had traveled with the caravan for business. Li Zihen, recalling similar situations with the pharmacy in the past, had no suspicions. Following this incident, Qinlan noticeably warmed up to both King Ian and Chu Hinian. Qinlan called her young daughter over, pointing to Chu Hinian and King Ian, saying, "In the future, these two will be your uncle and aunt." Encouraged by her mother, the little girl ran to King Ian, eager to get close to him. King Ian hadn't interacted much with children before. He glanced at Chu Hinian, who smiled back at him, and awkwardly bent down. He felt the soft cheek of the little girl against his own, a feeling both heartwarming and unfamiliar. Watching nearby, Li Zihen remarked with a smile, "You two should have a child soon. Then when this little one returns, she'll have a playmate." At these words, King Ian suddenly remembered the previous night. After finishing reading, Chu Hinian had gotten out of bed. King Ian assumed he was going to turn off the light, but it remained on, and Chu Hinian returned to bed. However, when King Ian turned and glimpsed the black wristband on Chu Hinian's arm, his face flushed red immediately. Despite the man's strong physique pressing against him, King Ian pushed him away and hid under the covers. Kisses landed on King Ian's ears, neck, and the rough hands slipped under the blanket. King Ian bit his lip, counting the days. It had been over a week since the last time they did it, and he wanted to, but he was afraid. King Ian covered his lower abdomen with his hand, knowing that the signs of pregnancy were sure to show up again there. He wasn't ready to have a child yet. This matter had a huge impact on him, and he needed time to adapt. Although the wristband helped during the process, in the end, the man's loss of control reached its peak, and King Ian himself was exhausted. No matter how he resisted, that place, like a wedge, went deeper and deeper. No matter how he pushed, climbed, or cried and begged, he couldn't break free, and in the end, almost all of it went in without wasting any. After several such incidents, it's unclear exactly when, but King Ian decided he didn't want to risk getting pregnant either. So, no matter how the man behind King Ian kissed him, how his body moved, he didn't move, biting his teeth and refusing to respond. Fortunately, when King Ian couldn't hold on any longer, Chu Hinian turned off the light, and the room suddenly went dark. King Ian was a little uneasy, afraid that the man would be angry. However, he hugged him around the waist and belly. A light kiss fell on the back of his neck, as if he knew everything. A low voice comforted him, "It's okay, go to sleep." This morning, Chu Hinian was still the same as before, as if nothing had happened, cooking and eating together. King Ian sighed with relief. The two finished their work together, and they came to Li Zihen's house for the festival at noon. Just now, Li Zihen's words made them quiet for a while. After that, King Ian heard Chu Hinian's low voice beside him, "This isn't an urgent matter, let's talk about it in a few years." Li Zihen also mentioned that she still needed to discuss important matters with King Ian. King Ian released his second batch of perfumes. He named them based on their distinct scents, designed labels, and Qinlan was thrilled with them, predicting they would sell well. After the Dragon Boat Festival, King Ian and Qi Yunyang revisited the county's major market. This time, along with snowflake ointment and perfume, King Ian also introduced various hair accessories and affordable jewelry. He emphasized quality over extravagance, believing it would appeal to customers. The success of these items largely depended on the stall owner's selection and King Ian's keen eye for aesthetics. Following King Ian's advice, Qi Yunyang also decided to venture into selling cosmetics like rouge and lead powder. She sought out a supplier through third brother Feng, who had recently started offering forehead ornaments, a trend that was just beginning to gain popularity. The county's large market was significantly bigger than those in the villages and towns, drawing a large flow of customers, including not only common folk but also wealthy noble families who flocked to make purchases. King Ian was thrilled with the turnout, and he and Qi Yunyang were kept busy throughout. They even enlisted the help of 3 sisters from a wealthy family to assist them. By nightfall, when it was time to pack up their stall, there was almost nothing left to take down. San Yao and Chu Hinian arrived to help dismantle the booth, and together they hurried back to the village under the cover of night. In the evening, King Ian and Qi Yunyang settled their accounts together and found that they had earned much more than the previous 2 times combined. King Ian conducted his usual review, focusing this time on using snowflake ointment as the primary product to drive sales of other items. The sale of perfume was particularly noteworthy. Despite being a new product that initially puzzled many customers, no one asked about it initially. Once customers tried it, many returned to purchase. The perfume's appeal was more immediate than that of snowflake ointment. Additionally, the goods brought by King Ian and Qi Yunyang, such as snowflake ointment and perfume, were well received by women and children. King Ian attributed this to their specific types and targeted audience, which proved more appealing than the varied offerings of previous stalls. The next day, King Ian settled Li Zihen's accounts, distributing the profits as per their agreed terms plus a commission. Surprisingly, King Ian's net profit this time exceeded 30 or 40 taels. Meanwhile, Chu Hinian recently returned with around 300 or 400 taels of silver, after deducting his daily expenses and purchasing supplies like fertilizer and hiring labor. Even so, he had less than 200 taels left. Adding their household savings, they now had over 400 taels in total. This amount was substantial enough to purchase 200 square meters of fertile land. King Ian joyfully stashed the money bag under the bed, unable to contain his happiness. A few days after the Dragon Boat Festival, the field work was nearly completed. With the seedlings sprouting, timely fertilizing, weeding, and pest control were now the main tasks. King Ian planned to handle these himself, only hiring help during the autumn harvest. According to tradition, on the final day of work, they treated their hired workers to a meal and drinks to show appreciation for their hard work. Since San Yao from Qi Yunyang's family wasn't available and it wasn't suitable to visit them, King Ian and Chu Hinian decided to host the meal at their own home. Qi Yunyang also brought over meat and vegetables, and together they prepared a large spread. Since their outer room wasn't big enough, they moved the feast to Wang the blacksmith's house. Chu Hinian bought 2 jars of wine and some smoked sauce from the town's cooked food shop. By noon, the 4 workers arrived from the fields. The eldest among them calmly washed up and sat at the table, while the youngest couldn't resist looking around curiously. He was particularly intrigued by Chu Hinian's scar, though the older worker discreetly reminded him to focus on the meal. Qi Yunyang went to pick up Nian Sheng from the private school, and once they returned, the meal began. King Yan brought out the freshly steamed powdered pork as the final dish. When he reached out, a glimpse of his white wrist was revealed, dazzlingly bright. After setting down the last dish, he sat down too, beside Chu Hinian, and they ate together. Chu Hinian took care of the 4 workers, while Qi Yunyang attended to Nian Sheng. King Yan ate quietly on his own. After finishing his meal, he went to tidy up the outer room and left without noticing someone's disappointed gaze. After 3 rounds of drinking, the old worker asked the young one to go to the outhouse together. The young man was a little unhappy and grumbled as he left, "Why do you call me to go with you? I don't want to go." Once in the courtyard, the old worker lowered his voice and said, "How many times have I told you, don't look around recklessly at Master's house. You must know your place." The young worker, already a little tipsy, burped and said, "Did you see that? Young Master Ru is so delicate, but the man in this house is so ugly. It's like a fresh flower planted in." "Shut up." The old worker interrupted him sharply, cutting off his words, deeply concerned, "With that mouth of yours, you're bound to get into trouble sooner or later." The young worker didn't care at all, wiping his chin with his finger, his eyes filled with fantasies. "Since young Master Ru is interested in him, although I'm poor, my looks aren't bad." Slap. The old worker slapped him hard on the back of his neck. Angered, the young man trembled all over. "You're really thick-headed. His demeanor and speech, how could you compare to him? Let me tell you, when we go back later, quietly eat your meal, and leave immediately without saying another word." The 2 returned to the house and resumed eating. King Yan and Qi Yunyang cleared up the outer room when they were almost done, and Nian Sheng had to go back to write the characters left by his teacher, so Qi Yunyang took him home first. King Yan returned to sit by the dining table, listening to their drinking and chatting. Midway through, the young worker went to the outhouse again. Perhaps because he had drunk too much, he didn't return for a while. After finishing the meal, which was already in the afternoon, they settled the wages beforehand. After the work was done by a few people, they enjoyed the good food and drink, and agreed to come back during the autumn harvest, satisfied, and went home. The 2 spent the whole afternoon exhausted, so they went back to their room to rest. After resting for a quarter of an hour, they both got up again. Chu Hinian was going to town in the afternoon to buy supplies, so King Yan went to get the money from the drawer under the bed. But as soon as he pulled open the drawer, he saw that the money bag that should have been inside was gone without a trace. The spot where it should have been was empty. King Yan exclaimed, and Chu Hinian asked, "What's wrong?" King Yan's face turned pale. The money has been taken. Over 400 taels of silver, all gone." Chapter 42. King Yan, utterly distraught, was taken by Chu Hinian to Aunt Li's house next door. Aunt Li, upon understanding what had happened, tears nearly streaming down her face, lamented the difficulty of saving money with 2 children. It was as if their entire savings had been stolen. She shook her head, wiping away tears, muttering, "Who did this, causing such misery?" King Yan's face was pale. After Aunt Li wiped away her tears and brought him hot water to drink slowly, he began to recover somewhat. Not long after, Qi Yunyang also knocked on the door and entered. She said to King Yan, "Big brother told me everything. He asked me to come and keep you company. Don't worry too much. These workers are all from nearby villages. They can't escape from here. Big brother and the others will surely catch them." She sighed deeply, blaming herself. "It's all my fault for not choosing the right people, causing such trouble for your family." King Yan shook his head and said, "It's not your fault at all. We thought we knew them well. They were familiar workers, who could have imagined they would do such a thing? I just hope they haven't gone too far and can still be found." After talking for a while, King Ian gradually emerged from the panic and heartache. He secretly thought that even if they couldn't recover everything, money was just material wealth. They were young, capable of earning more from scratch. They had hands and feet and weren't afraid of working hard. Before an hour had passed since these words were spoken, Lu's daughter-in-law hurriedly arrived, her face filled with worry. They've caught the person and are now at the village head's house. Everyone hurriedly went together to the village head's house. When they arrived, they found the village head's house tightly closed. After knocking for a while, the village head's son came to open a crack in the door and peered out. Seeing them, he opened the door and let them in but closed it firmly behind them and locked it. Inside the house were the village head, his two eldest sons, the Lu brothers, and Chu Hinian. Standing neatly in front of them were the 4 workers hired by King Yan and Qi Yunyang. Seeing King Yan and the others enter, Chu Hinian quickly scanned King Yan's face and body. Seeing that King Yan's complexion had improved a lot since he had left, he withdrew his gaze and looked at the 4 men standing in front of him. The old worker looked nervous but spoke clearly, "You can inquire throughout the neighboring 10 miles. My family used to be scholars. We fell to this level due to our family's decline. I understand propriety and righteousness. I've been a laborer for 10 years and have never stolen a single copper from the master's house. If I did this, may the heavens strike me dead." The other workers also defended themselves in similar manners. Only the youngest worker's eyes wandered, his face filled with panic. Whenever someone spoke a little louder, he would flinch, looking unsettled. After the others had spoken, he stammered, I didn't steal. Steal the money. You can ask around in the neighboring village. I usually work odd jobs in town and work as a laborer during the farming season. I've never stolen from the master's house. I found you at the tavern in town. Did you go drinking as soon as you left Liushi village? Chu Hinian suddenly asked. The young worker dared not look him in the eye, just nodded with his head down. Chu Hinian continued, the other 3 have all gone home. Why didn't you? The young man hesitated. They all have wives, but I don't. I was planning to go to the Plum Blossom Pavilion in town. I had my eye on that courtesan, who costs 2 taels of silver. I didn't want to spend the money, so I went drinking instead. He gritted his teeth and raised his head defiantly. Visiting a prostitute and drinking isn't a crime. Why did you arrest me? I want to go home. As he spoke, he began to walk away. At that moment, a figure suddenly rushed over and, just as the young worker reached the door, exclaimed, "Ah!" and kicked him down. Chu Hinian withdrew his leg and bent down to grab the outer garment of the person who had reached the door. The garment tore open, revealing a cloth bundle hidden in his abdomen. Chu Hinian reached in and pulled out the bundle. The young worker on the ground, enduring the pain, tried to snatch it back but was evaded by Chu Hinian. The bundle was light and didn't seem like it contained silver. Chu Hinian was puzzled. After shaking it open, some of the contents spilled out, and he was slightly startled. While most people hadn't yet understood what was happening inside the bundle, Chu Hinian tightly grasped the bundle in his hand. He then kicked the young worker several times, causing him to scream continuously. Lu, who had been following closely behind, apparently saw what was inside the bundle and was also stunned for a moment. Then, seeing Chu Hinian's reaction, seemed to understand something and quickly intervened, saying, "Calm down. He deserves to be punished, but if you beat him to death, you'll have to pay with your life." At this point, the others also came to their senses and rushed forward to stop Chu Hinian. However, Chu Hinian was very strong and forcibly dragged these several strong young men forward, kicking the young worker on the ground several times until King Yan squeezed to his side and hugged him, looking up at him with concern and fear. Chu Hinian finally stopped, gasping heavily, his eyes red. Lu went to talk quietly with the village head for a few words. The village head suddenly showed an understanding expression. He spoke up, "The others can leave first. Chu Hinian and I have something to discuss, along with Lu. You stay too." Everyone, including the other 3 workers who were too frightened to speak up, went out. King Yan comfortingly squeezed Chu Hinian's wrist, and he smiled faintly at him. King Yan finally left the room with peace of mind. Once King Yan left, Chu Hinian's face darkened. Inside the room, only the 3 of them remained and the young worker on the ground, groaning in pain. Their voices were so low that they couldn't be heard clearly, only occasionally hearing a few cries of pain. Outside, King Yan anxiously waited and remembered when he had hugged Chu Hinian earlier. His fingers touched something tightly held in his palm, cool and slippery, like a piece of cloth. The feeling was somewhat familiar, but he couldn't remember what it was for a while. It wasn't until after dinner time that the door to the room finally opened. The young worker was tied up and taken to the woodshed, where he was locked up. The old worker saw this and couldn't bear to watch. He wanted to speak up for him, but the village head spoke first. "We'll report to the authorities tomorrow morning. Everything will be clear then." That night, King Ian stayed in the empty bedroom at Aunt Lee's house. Chu Hinian stayed at home, living in the house next door to Wang the blacksmith's. Late at night, Chu Hinian took out the cloth bundle he had hidden during the day. After shaking it open, a silky, pure white undershirt slipped out. Chu Hinian looked down at it. It was the white and light yellow ones he had picked out for King Ian in the tailor shop back in early spring. The white one was a silk shirt. It was quite expensive. With not much money at home before, Chu Hinian had been thinking about it for a long time. When there was a little more money at home, he quickly bought it for him. King Ian was originally fair-skinned. Wearing this shirt made him even more clear and translucent. Under the oil lamplight, his skin was as lustrous as a pearl. Chu Hinian couldn't remember how many nights he had held the young man in his arms, his large hands stroking down his back from behind his neck, all the way down. Stroking it all the way, King Ian would raise his arms around his neck, his face lying in his neck, making a subtle hum like a kitten. Chu Hinian tightly twisted the intimate clothing in his hand until it became deformed. Thinking of the fact that the worker had stolen this intimate clothing and even took it to the Plum Blossom Pavilion, Chu Hinian's eyes turned bloodshot. If this matter became known to the villagers, they would inevitably gossip and fabricate sordid stories. Chu Hinian decided to keep it a secret. He didn't want King Ian to feel distressed because of this, so he kept it from him as well. The few people who knew about this were reliable and discreet. He didn't worry about them. After giving the worker a lesson, he dared not speak rashly. With this in mind, Chu Hinian stood up, took the intimate clothing and the cloth bundle in his hand, and threw them into the burning stove. The thin garments quickly turned into ashes. Tomorrow, he would buy another identical one and put it back in the closet. King Ian would never know. Early the next morning, before dawn, Chu Hinian went to the county office with the Liu brothers. They returned with 2 bailiffs from the county office. The bailiffs first interrogated the young worker. Despite him being alone briefly during dinner, he still denied stealing the silver coins. The bailiffs then inspected the scene of the incident, searched under the bed drawers, checked under the bed and around it, as well as the windows and doors of the house and the courtyard gate. One bailiff asked, "Was there always someone at home yesterday?" Chu Hinian replied, "In the morning, I was at the shop, and my wife went to town to buy vegetables. She was probably gone for less than an hour." The bailiff then asked King Ian, "When you returned, did you notice anything unusual? Were all the doors and windows locked and closed?" King Ian nodded and said, "Yes, I didn't notice anything wrong." The 2 bailiffs discussed for a while and said, "This worker is highly suspicious. Let's take him back to the county office. Even if he insists, once we use torture, he will confess within a few hours." Saying that, they walked towards the door, preparing to take the worker from the village head's house. Just then, the bailiff at the front suddenly exclaimed, He bent down and picked up a piece of paper from inside the door. The other bailiff reacted quickly and rushed out the door. The bailiff holding the paper quietly read aloud a few lines on it. "Yesterday, around the hour of C, I saw someone climbing over the west side of this door's courtyard wall, with a cloth bag tied around his waist. This person has a bad reputation in the village and fears retaliation, so I dared not inform anyone. But my conscience troubled me, so I left this letter. Please do not investigate me. T/N, around 4 p.m. Following these lines, at the very bottom, a few short words were written. "The person I saw is Wang Heiao, the eldest of the Wang family who lives in the east of the village." Chu Hinian and King Ian stood beside the bailiff, reading these words clearly. The method of delivering this letter seemed familiar. King Ian's gaze swept over the handwriting, recalling the scene when he had taught the person to write a few days ago while he was sick. His eyelids twitched slightly, and he looked up at Chu Hinian. Chu Hinian felt his gaze, withdrew his eyes from the letter, and looked at him. After a moment, he shook his head at King Ian. Chapter 43. The other bailiff who had gone out came back panting and said, "There's no one outside. It seems someone saw us enter and slipped the letter in. The bailiff holding the letter pondered for a moment and asked Chu Hinian, your foster father's surname is Wang, and the letter mentions someone surnamed Wang as well. What's your relationship with them? Chu Hinian then explained his relationship with the remaining two brothers of the Wang family and recounted past grievances. The bailiff furrowed his brow and said, it looks like regardless of who the sender is, we need to visit this eldest Wang's house. Due to past conflicts between Wang Heiyao and Chu Hinian, the bailiffs didn't ask them to lead the way but instead inquired about the general direction and proceeded. As the two bailiffs arrived at the east side of the village, many children of various ages who hadn't seen such a scene before followed them playfully. The incident of money being stolen from the second son of the Wang family had already spread through the village several times last night. As the bailiffs walked along, many people peeked out of their homes, and some curious ones asked if the bailiffs were going to arrest someone at eldest Wang's house. The bailiff stopped and asked, how do you know we're going to eldest Wang's house, and why do you think we're going to arrest him? The person looked around and lowered his voice, saying, I heard that the money stolen from the second son of the Wang family was by a worker. But you didn't take the worker away, instead, you came towards eldest Wang's direction. Most likely, you're going to arrest him. His mother has been hungry and her face is blue recently. She hasn't stopped him from going out to eat, drink, gamble, and visit brothels. Yesterday, I heard their mother crying in the courtyard, and her husband was sobbing. I don't know if they've lost all their savings, but they were desperate and went to steal money from the second son of the Wang family. The bailiffs looked at each other with even more suspicion in their eyes. They hadn't gone far when they arrived at their destination. After knocking on the door, a thin man in his 30s wearing a grey robe, with a clear blue palm print on one side of his face, came to open it. When he saw that it was the bailiffs, he looked somewhat flustered, but it was understandable. Common people were inevitably apprehensive when facing those who ate at public expense, especially in this remote mountain village where most villagers had never seen much of the world and had little interaction with the county office. The leading bailiff asked, are you Shen Wen, the husband of Wang Heiyao? Shen Wen lowered his head, somewhat fearful, and nodded, yes, sir. The bailiff asked again, is Wang Heiyao at home? Shen Wen shook his head and said, he's not. He just went out. Before he could finish his sentence, an elderly woman from behind asked, who's there? Shen Wen quickly turned around and replied, Mother, it's two bailiffs, sir. They're asking where my husband went. The old woman came out, looking somewhat worn out, with deep wrinkles on her face. When she saw the bailiffs, she also seemed afraid, shrinking her shoulders and saying, my son Heiyao went to the county town. His friends invited him for a drink. As soon as these words came out, the leading bailiff keenly noticed that Shen Wen suddenly looked back at his mother-in-law, then quickly lowered his eyes. The bailiff looked at Shen Wen and said, tell me, where did Wang Heiyao really go? If you don't tell the truth, you'll get the paddle in court. Shen Wen suddenly raised his head, his face pale, and said, He went to the gambling den in town. The bailiff squinted and asked, I asked the neighbors earlier. Your family can hardly put food on the table. Where did he get the money to go to the gambling den? Shen Wen was about to reply when the cowering old lady suddenly burst forward and rushed to hit someone, shouting, you bastard! How dare you speak nonsense? Watch me kill you. Her hand was already swinging towards his face. The two bailiffs were not to be trifled with. One raised his hand and stopped the old lady, scolding, cause any more trouble, and we'll take you back to the county office. The old lady spoke fiercely, her eyes red, you can't catch the thief, so you're coming to arrest us. Heiyao loves gambling and drinking, but he's not a bad person. He definitely didn't take the money. If you dare to arrest him, I'll go to the magistrate and report you. Her inadvertent remarks hit the mark. There had indeed been cases of such things happening in the county office. After the incident, it even affected the promotion of the county magistrate and deputy magistrate at the time. Therefore, the county's punishment in this regard was extremely strict. If discovered, not only would one be dismissed, but they would also end up in jail. It was as miserable as it could be. So upon hearing this, the two bailiffs both had their faces changed. The leading bailiff grabbed the old lady's shoulder with an iron palm, his eyes showing disgust and coldness, saying, "In that case, you'll come with us to the county office and make your complaint to the magistrate." The bailiff sneered, "But let me tell you something in advance. If you make false accusations without evidence, you'll get the paddle. At your age and with your health, I'm afraid it's one way in and no way out." Having said that, the two bailiffs shook their clothes and walked out of the village. With the situation as it was, whether the money was stolen by Wang Hao would be revealed once they arrested the person in the gambling den and brought him back for trial. Once the people were gone, the old lady sat on the ground, slapped her thighs, and began to wail. Shen Wen also burst into tears, crying uncontrollably, unsure of what to do. Someone went to help Shen Wen up and reminded him, "Anyway, first take your mother-in-law home. There are so many people here, all watching the show at your house." Shen Wen hurriedly nodded, wiped away his tears, and went to help the old lady who was sitting on the ground. When the old lady saw him, she stopped crying, her eyebrows raised sharply, and she reached out to hit him again, but was stopped by villagers nearby, who said, "He's helping you kindly. What are you doing?" The old lady cursed, "It's all his fault. Since marrying him, nothing good has happened." Despite the continued accusations, the degree of harm did not diminish. Shen Wen covered his face and cried aloud, which made the villagers sigh. The old lady didn't want to continue being watched, so she got up from the ground, pulled Shen Wen crying, and walked back. Once in the yard, she slammed the door shut with a bang, blocking the eyes of the onlookers outside. Once inside the house, the old lady swung her arm and slapped Shen Wen, yelling, "You traitor, selling out your husband." But this slap didn't land on Shen Wen's face. Shen Wen grabbed her wrist, no longer showing any sign of weakness or continuous tears on her face. His eyes were bright, his back straight, and he seemed to stand much taller all of a sudden, with a faint smile at the corners of his mouth as he looked at the old lady. Mrs. Wang was stunned. She saw her usually obedient daughter-in-law smiling at her and saying, "If you don't discipline your son properly, someone else will. He probably won't come back. You're getting old. Think carefully about how to live the rest of your days." With that, Shen Wen shook off her hand, causing the old lady to stumble, and then he walked into the house and slammed the door shut with a bang. Mrs. Wang was full of anger and was about to kick open the door to confront him. But as she lifted her foot, her leg almost gave out, and she nearly sat down on the ground. She was already old. If her son really didn't come back, who could she rely on? The fire of anger gradually faded from Mrs. Wang's eyes. She stood blankly at Shen Wen's door for a while, then hung her head in dismay and turned back to her own room, closing the door behind her. At noon, news spread in the town that the two bailiffs had found Wang Hao, who was gambling enthusiastically at the gambling house, and took him directly to the county office. According to witnesses, Wang Hao had been on a winning streak today, boasting and laughing until the bailiffs arrived, and he realized he was in trouble. He tried to run, but his body was too weak. He stumbled after a few steps and fell to the ground. The bailiffs easily tied him up and took him away. In the afternoon, Chu Hinian was summoned to the county office as the victim. The village head and Lu Fa accompanied him. Other villagers who were curious followed behind. King Yan wanted to go too, but Chu Hinian said there might be corporal punishment involved, so King Yan reluctantly stayed home to wait for news. The wait lasted until before dinner, when some villagers rushed back home anxiously before finishing the matter. Other villagers crowded around and asked, "Wow." As soon as he was put in the squeeze, Wang Hao confessed. He stole the money from the second son of the Wang family. Yesterday morning, when no one was home, he jumped in, pried open the window, and took the entire money bag. This guy is really shameless. The family can't even afford food. After stealing the money, he didn't even buy a grain of rice for the family. He returned home for a moment and went straight to the gambling house in town. He was still on trial when I left. It probably won't be finished for a while. King Yan waited until dark before hearing noises outside the courtyard. Li Shen went out with him and saw the familiar tall figure walking in. Chu Hinian smiled tiredly at him and said, "I'm back." During dinner, Chu Hinian briefly talked about the situation in court, similar to what the early returning villagers had said. After that, the county magistrate asked some detailed questions. The reason there were no signs of forced entry on the doors and windows of the house was because Wang Heiyao had been familiar with the place since he was a child. Chu Hinian didn't know that the window in the house where blacksmith Wang lived had a slight problem. Even if it was locked from the inside, it could still be pried open from the outside by pinching the window frame. As for how Wang Heiyao knew where the money was hidden, he couldn't explain it. He just felt it should be there. When he entered the house, he went straight to the bottom drawer of the bed and indeed found it. After dinner, Li Shen went back, and Chu Hinian took out the money bag from the bag, placed it heavily on the table, and opened it for King Yan to see. Inside, there were neatly stacked over 400 taels of silver. The feeling of recovering what was lost was even more joyful than when they first obtained it. King Yan touched the silver coins and asked, "What will happen to Wang Heiyao?" Chu Hinian pondered for a moment and said, "The laws of this dynasty are very harsh on theft. The county will report to the prefecture, and the prefecture will continue to report further. We'll have to wait a few months to know the specific outcome." After these anxious days, they finally settled down. After washing up that night, the two went to sleep. The next day, Chu Hinian repaired the broken window and carefully inspected the other windows and doors again. In the morning, villagers came by from time to time to inquire about yesterday's situation at the county office. Chu Hinian repeated what the villagers had said yesterday. As more people heard it, they found it less interesting and stopped coming. In the afternoon, the two of them went to town together again and deposited all the surplus silver money that was not needed at home into the bank. They used to find depositing and withdrawing troublesome because they had to go to town specially. Now, for the sake of safety, they had no choice but to deposit it. They also bought a sturdy lock from the grocery store. When they returned home, they put the silver money left for feed and purchases deep into the cabinet and securely locked it with the new lock bought in town before they could rest assured. The village knew that their family had lost a lot of money, but only a few people knew how much exactly. However, rumors would eventually die down over time. That night, the couple took a bath. King Yan went to the cabinet to find his white underclothes, and found nothing wrong. After drying off, he put them on. He lay down in bed and turned off the light. Chu Hinian turned sideways and hugged him, lowered his head to smell the fragrance of his hair, and gently stroked down his back from behind his neck with his large hand. King Yan hummed comfortably a few times and pressed his face against his neck. Until that warm hand continued down to pat twice on the fleshiest part of him, King Yan's body stiffened suddenly. Feeling the soft, full sensation in the palm of his hand, Chu Hinian felt a bit restless in his heart, but he didn't have any real thoughts. It was just an itchy hand. He smiled helplessly, kissed King Yan on the top of his head, and whispered softly, "You've been tired these days. Don't move, just sleep." Chapter 44. A few days ago, Shen Min secretly sold the jade bracelet his mother gave him when he got married, and got 3 taels of silver for it. Of course, no one knew about this, and the money he earned was hidden away. That day, after Wang Heiyao was scared away from home with a kitchen knife, he staggered back late at night, drunk from who knows where. He sat on the ground outside, crying and laughing intermittently, muttering drunkenly. After a while, he suddenly got up from the ground, kicked Shen Min's door vigorously with his feet, and cursed obscenely, "You little bitch, come out. You said we would live or die together, but now life is unbearable. I'll kill you first, then my mother, and we'll all live together in hell." He kicked the door a few times, but instead of breaking it down, he was bounced back and sat on the ground. This fall hurt his tailbone, and he was in pain, unable to get up for a long time. Later, he actually fell asleep sitting like that. The next day, when Shen Min got up and left the house, he woke up Wang Heiyao, who was lying like a dead dog at his door. After Wang Heiyao woke up, it seemed like he had forgotten all the harsh words from yesterday. His eyes were vacant as he stood up and sat down at the dining table, muttering, "I smell meat. Who's stewing meat? Smells delicious." Old Mrs. Wang also got up. Obviously, she had heard Wang Heiao's harsh words last night. Now she remained silent, her wrinkles on her face particularly prominent, quietly boiling the moldy porridge. Shen Min said he was going out for a while and would be back soon, but no one asked, and no one responded. The whole room was dead silent. After a short while, Shen Min did indeed return, carrying 2 pounds of pork buttock meat in his hands. When old Mrs. Wang saw it, her eyes lit up. Wang Heyao also perked up, his eyes turning blue, and he fiercely asked, "Where did you get the money to buy meat? If you have money, why not go to the gambling den to recover your losses?" Shen Min, with lowered eyelids, replied indifferently, "Where did I get the money to buy meat? It was given to me by King Ian." Wang Heyao cursed, "It's all that damned old man's fault for causing this trouble. He sold the shop to outsiders, and they're living well." Shen Min didn't even raise his eyelids, concealing the light inside, and said, "They have skills and make money, isn't that what they deserve?" The room fell silent for a moment. Wang Heyao's eyes flickered, lost in thought. After the meat was stewed, Wang Heyao almost ate it all by himself, leaving only a few bites for his mother. After finishing the meat, Wang Heyao stared blankly at the empty plate. Shen Min's voice woke him up, and he looked up fiercely at him. Shen Min said, "Come in, I have something to tell you." Wang Heyao followed him in, and then saw Shen Min take out a cloth bag from under the bed, open it, and inside was a whole bunch of copper coins. Wang Heyao's face immediately turned fierce, snatched the money away, and harshly said, "You bitch, you really hid the money." Shen Min said, "This money is for buying a shroud for myself when I die." Wang Heyao sneered, took the money, and left the house. The next day, Wang Heyao returned with dark circles under his eyes, his pockets empty, sitting in the yard in a daze. He shouted a few times for someone in the house, but no one answered. He cursed a few times and was about to go back to sleep in the house. Just as he was about to lie down, his movements suddenly stopped. He got up again and went into Shen Min's neighboring room next door, heading straight for the drawer under the bed. Inside, there was a small cloth bag. He picked it up and opened it, exclaiming, "This bastard, he still has more." Inside were several hundred yuan of money. On the third day, Wang Heyao went to the drawer under the bed again and found more money. On the fourth day, there was more again. It wasn't until the fifth day that the money bag in the drawer was empty. On the sixth day, Wang Heyao sneaked into Chu Hinian and King Yan's house. There were no dogs in the yard this time. Once inside the house, he went straight to the drawer under the bed. After rummaging for a while and finding nothing, he felt frustrated. Thinking of leaving, but unwilling to give up, he pulled out the entire drawer and only then saw a cloth bag blocked by a plank at the deepest part. Wang Heyao took the bag, felt its weight, almost unable to lift his hand, and suddenly felt ecstatic. Carefully restoring the doors and windows, he secretly left. Back home, Wang Heyao was arrogant and proud. When he saw Shen Min, he slapped him hard and kicked his old mother, who asked him for money, making the old lady sit on the ground patting her thigh and crying. Now, Wang Heyao could pay back Wang Lei's money. His shoulder injury was probably healed, and it would be difficult to accuse him again. He was fearless again. Wang Heyao wanted to deal with Shen Min first but was anxious to go to the gambling den. So, he left a stern warning that he would deal with him when he returned. He never expected that once he left, he would never come back again. The next day, Chu Hinian went to the village chief's house. The hired worker was still locked in the village chief's woodshed. It's unknown what he said to the man, but after the hired worker was released, he packed his bags overnight and left the area hurriedly, as if he were being chased by a ghost. The incident of Wang Heyao being arrested and thrown into the dungeon was a major event that had never happened in Liuzi village, and the villagers chatted about it for a long time after meals and in their free time. Privately, King Yan also talked about this matter with Chu Hinian. King Yan said, "That note was written by Shen Min. I recognize his handwriting. When I was recuperating at home, he saw me practicing calligraphy and wanted to learn, so I taught him some characters." Chu Hinian said, "When I saw the bailiff pick up the note from the ground, I immediately thought it was probably him." With that, King Ian remembered something, went to Wang Taijiang's house, and found the calligraphy papers he had practiced before. He flipped through them one by one, found the ones Shen Min had practiced, and as he looked, King Ian's face changed. He handed those papers to Chu Hinian. Chu Hinian looked down and read them for a while, his expression also turning serious. After a while, he took those papers to the outside room and threw them into the furnace pit without hesitation, burning them all. King Ian stood beside him and watched without stopping him. Most of the characters Shen Min learned to write were on those papers, which were also on the note. During the days when he was bedridden and unable to get up after jumping into the well, Shen Min had already figured out how to send Wang He out to prison, and had already started implementing his plan. According to the laws of the dynasty, if a husband kills his wife, as long as he can prove that his wife was disobedient or having an affair, he would not be punished. Proving disobedience was simple, it only required the recognition of an elder. Other daughter-in-laws or husbands with maternal backing, no matter how scoundrelly their husbands were, would not dare to do so lightly, but Shen Min did not. Shen Min knew he had no way out. He couldn't hold on for long. If Wang Heao didn't die, then he would. It was 2 days before Qingming, and Shen Min was still recuperating at King Yan's house. Chu Hinian found an excuse to call King Yan into the house, and when he came out, both of their faces were a bit flushed. Shen Min naturally knew what had happened and couldn't help but cover his mouth and laugh. At that time, the door was half open, and Shen Min saw King Yan put the silver coins given by Chu Hinian into the drawer under the bed. He made a slight adjustment to his originally planned plan. Originally, he intended to use his neighbor as the scapegoat. Seeing this scene, he changed his mind and chose King Yan's family, which was more reliable. Because the more he stole, the heavier the punishment, and the less likely Wang Heao was to return. After this storm subsided, Chu Hinian and King Yan invited the Lu family and the village chief's family, as well as the 2 brothers from the village chief's family, to have a meal together at home, with chicken, duck, fish, good wine, and a sumptuous feast. Those days they had been helping out and had spent a lot of effort. King Yan arranged this meal very clearly, and after a hearty drink, the relationships between the families became closer. Qi Yinglan had already passed the period of morning sickness. With a hearty appetite, the Lu family's life was good. He was kept much fairer and fatter than when he first married. His face, which was not outstanding, looked a little more handsome. Lu Kai was quite concerned about this husband of his. As he drank, his eyes kept glancing at Yinglan's bowl. When he saw it empty, he stretched out his arm and used it to pick vegetables into her bowl. Lu Fa's wife teased, "Okay, enough. Your arm can reach half the table. Yinglan has me and King Yan to take care of. You don't have to worry." Lu Kai's face reddened a little and he laughed. "I'm not afraid Yinglan's face is too small to dare to stretch out chopsticks." Yinglan blushed and blamed him teasingly, "Brother King Yan, I've been here to your house several times, where would I dare not to eat? Come on, finish your own meal." Lu Kai wasn't bothered either, he chuckled and said, contentedly, but still occasionally passed some dishes over. Recently married and having the news of pregnancy, the young couple enjoyed their time together. After the meal, the men knew to help tidy up, but King Yan wouldn't let them lift a finger since they were guests. He brewed some tea for them to enjoy at the table. Lu Fa's wife and Qi Yinglan were persuaded to rest on the bed, cracking melon seeds and chatting. As King Ian moved in and out, he overheard the men chatting inside. They started with Wang Heao's matter, but Lu Fa's wife on the bed's edge objected, saying it was unlucky to discuss such things now. They changed the topic. While King Ian heated water for their teapot, Lu Fa was patting Chu Hinian's shoulder, saying, "My wife and I had 3 kids in 3 years of marriage. Your younger brother will likely become a father soon after the new year. The 2 brothers of our village chief's family should marry within these 2 years. Brother, you should hurry up too." Lu Fa's wife from the bed's edge added, "Once you have kids, you'll understand. They're so soft and tender. When they call you father and King Yan dad, you'll want to give them your heart." Chu Hinian, a bit drunk, had a flushed face and slowed speech, repeating his usual line, "King Yan is still young, no rush." Lu Fa's wife widened her eyes, clapped her thigh, and exclaimed, "He's not that young. I got married at 18, Yinglan is only 19 this year. Even if King Yan isn't in a hurry, you, big brother, will turn 27 after the new year. Look around our village, except for those 2 poor to marry, how many men of your age aren't fathers yet?" Lu Fa then added, "Having children gives a home its true feel, doesn't it? With more people in the house, it's not as lonely." The 2 brothers from the village chief's family nodded in agreement. Finally, Lu Fa said, "Last time you drank at my place, you got quite drunk and told me that the night Wang Taijiang passed away, you sat alone in the yard the whole night. He sighed. I understand your feelings too well. When my father passed away, Luke, I wasn't quite capable yet, struggling in a strange place with a tough business. I was so worried. If I hadn't married and had your sister-in-law, then later had children, I wouldn't have been able to hold on. He shook his head and advised, brother, once you're married and have children, that's when you truly won't feel lonely. King Ian didn't hear the end of the conversation as he continued tidying up outside, but he couldn't shake off the phrase "sat alone in the yard the whole night" from his mind. Not long after, there was a sound from Wang Taijiang's room. King Ian turned to see Chu Hinian slowly closing the door behind him and approaching him. King Ian looked up at him and asked softly, "Had a bit too much to drink?" Chu Hinian nodded, his eyes somewhat dull, and spoke slowly, "A little." King Ian rarely saw him like this and couldn't help but smile, saying, "After they leave, don't go to the shop. Just rest at home." Chu Hinian didn't reply but looked calmly into King Ian's eyes. Puzzled, King Ian stared back at him. After a moment, Chu Hinian unexpectedly lifted his hand and flicked King Ian's nose lightly, with a hint of reproachful meaning in his slow voice, "You always avoid me when we get to bed." King Ian was momentarily stunned. He could tell Chu Hinian, drunk as he was, wasn't quite his usual self. Indeed, he'd noticed it all along but hadn't brought it up. Seeing King Ian's stunned look, Chu Hinian smiled, took a step closer, and in a low, serious tone said, "Don't listen to them. If you don't want children, we won't have them. As long as I have you, I won't feel lonely at all." Chapter 45. Entering July meant the arrival of summer. People shed their thick robes, jackets, and padded coats, replacing them with light and cool linen shirts. As soon as the sun rose, it scorched like fire. The blacksmith shop closed for business in this hottest month, and field work couldn't be done during the day, so they had to rise early and finish tasks quickly while it was still dark. Luckily, they only needed to weed and deal with pests. Due to digging irrigation channels in spring, although it cost a lot of money, the problem of watering was completely solved, saving a lot of effort. Despite the unfortunate incident with the hired laborers, they did their work quite well. King Ian had never experienced days like these before. The summer nights were long, and because he woke up early every day, many times he felt sleepy and exhausted before it was even dark, washing up early and going to bed. After finishing work in the fields, Chu Hinian would tidy up the vegetables they picked and put them on the cart, storing the tools properly. He left a space for King Ian on the cart with a thick mat, and on the way back, King Ian would sit on it, shading himself with an oiled paper umbrella, sipping from the water pouch and nibbling on biscuits, half closing his eyes, waiting for his husband to pull him home. Sometimes they picked so many vegetables that they wouldn't return home but would instead go directly to the town to sell them, earning a bit more. On the way back, King Ian would either have an extra bowl of chilled licorice soup or some sweet ice, enjoying himself. Occasionally, he would call out Hinian, but the man pulling the cart would just shake his head and say, "I'm not eating." After a while, King Ian would call out husband, and the man would have to stop the cart and go over to taste the ice treat his husband had given him. Once, King Ian ate too much chilled papaya and had a bad stomach for 2 or 3 days, causing him to lose weight. This project, which he found extremely delightful, was forcibly terminated by Chu Hinian. After that incident, King Ian didn't want to eat it anymore, as those days with a bad stomach were extremely embarrassing for him. On the first day, he ran to the latrine more than 10 times. The doctor had come and administered medicine, pinching his nose to make him swallow it, but medicinal soups don't take effect so quickly. By the second day, his buttocks were rubbed raw, and he still had to make frequent trips to the latrine. Every time he went, the places where the skin had just started to heal would get rubbed raw again. King Ian was originally afraid of pain and wouldn't stop fussing over a cut finger. At the moment, his stomach was still cramping, and his buttocks hurt too. Chu Hinian hadn't seen him return for a long time and worriedly went to look for him, only to find him leaning against the wall, tears streaming down his face, quietly crying. Before, King Ian had suffered quietly on his own, but since crying in front of others twice, he no longer cared about that bit of pride. When he was uncomfortable, he would cry once. Seeing him like this, Chu Hinian felt both distressed and amused. He carried him back to the house and laid him on the bed as if he were a patient who couldn't take care of himself. He brought a basin of water to wash his face and hands. Later, he also lit the stove and boiled hot water. When Chu Henian had finished his busy work and entered the house, King Ian, with tearful eyes, asked, "Why did you boil water? I don't want to drink it." Chu Henian poured the hot water into the basin, mixed in some cold water to test the temperature, and said, "From now on, I'll wash you every time. It'll help you feel better." King Ian hesitated for a moment, doubting whether he understood correctly, but Chu Henian had already given him the answer with practical actions. The curtains were drawn, dimming the room considerably. Chu Henian walked up to King Ian, lifted him effortlessly by his waist and abdomen. It seemed effortless, and King Ian hung in the air from the bed like a chick. The basin of hot water was placed on the ground beside the bed behind him. Chu Henian whispered, "Put on your shoes and squat down." King Ian subconsciously obeyed and was then gripped by the shoulders, his body leaning forward involuntarily, his hands pressed against the edge of the bed on the board used to step up. That's how he was raised up. Then his pants were pulled down, making him feel the piercing cold. When the hot water touched him, he trembled all over, eyes wide open in disbelief at what was happening. Meanwhile, Chu Henian had already started washing him as carefully as possible. It wasn't clear how long it took, but Chu Henian didn't dare use the usual cloth in the house to wipe him, fearing it would hurt his delicate skin. Instead, he used his own clean and soft undershirt to wipe him and then washed it off. After he finished wiping and made sure it was dry, he went to help King Ian up, only to see him crying again, his face flushed red. Chu Henian hurriedly picked him up, let him sit on his lap, and patted his back like comforting a child, asking softly, "What's wrong? Did I hurt you while wiping you?" King Ian shook his head, hugged Chu Henian's neck, choked and said, "You washed so slowly, I feel so embarrassed." Chu Henian kissed his forehead with a smile, "I've seen every part of you. There's nothing to be embarrassed about." "No," King Ian hiccuped, "you washed so slowly. I feel like I need to go to the latrine again, sob." Chu Henian was taken aback for a moment, then burst into laughter and said, "It's okay. After it's done, I'll wash you again. The hot water hasn't cooled down yet." By the time King Ian recovered, it was 2 days later. The washing indeed worked. The number of times he went to the latrine on the last day also decreased, and the skin slowly healed. Minor ailments were also quite exhausting. When King Ian felt better, he thought the sky was especially blue, and the food was especially fragrant. Everything seemed so good. That morning, just as it was getting light, the rooster stood on the fence crowing, and unexpectedly, a small hen joined in, chirping incessantly. King Ian thought it was an old kite coming down to catch the chickens. This had happened before. The chicken's neck was bitten and bleeding, and afterward, the hen's neck had been crooked, never straightening out again. King Ian could only be thankful that it survived. T/N, a type of carnivorous bird. Hearing the chicken's cries, King Ian quickly ran into the yard, moving faster than Chu Henian, who followed behind. As a result, the old kite didn't see them, and King Ian reached into the chicken coop and found a warm egg. It was the first egg laid by the chickens he raised, and there was still a little blood on the shell. King Ian took this egg and showed it to Chu Henian, who followed behind him. He had recently tanned a bit, but he was still fairer than others. After a few days of stomach trouble, the flesh on his cheeks had thinned out, his chin was sharp, and his clothes were loose, making him look pitiable. Right now, he was extremely happy, his eyes sparkling brightly, his expression excited and somewhat showy. Chu Henian looked down at him, a smile playing on his lips. He reached out and pinched his chin, praising him, "King Ian is really amazing." That morning, 3 more chickens laid eggs one after another, just enough to fry a dish. King Ian eagerly wanted to cook, but Chu Henian stopped him. He washed his hands, put on an apron, kneaded dough, cooked a pot of light noodles, and made 2 poached eggs. King Ian was a bit disappointed, but now it was important to stay healthy, so he had to endure it. Early the next morning, Chu Henian went to work in the field, moving quietly so as not to wake King Ian. King Ian slept until he woke up naturally before getting up. This time, there was no pain anywhere. He felt comfortable all over, finally completely healed. After the chickens laid eggs, they needed to eat something nutritious. King Ian went to the village oil mill to buy some soybean cakes pressed from leftover bean dregs, brought them home, and cooked them slowly in a large pot. Then he put on a straw hat, dug half a basket of wild lettuce and a shepherd's purse by the river at the door. These things were available until autumn. After digging a batch, they would grow another batch soon, which was best for feeding chickens and ducks. After King Ian finished digging, he took them back and rinsed them in the root. Then he set them aside to dry. When the soybean cakes were cooked, they were soft and warm. Using a kitchen knife, he sliced them into pieces, chopped them finely after cooling, chopped the lettuce and shepherd's purse, mixed them together, put them in a food bowl, and all the chicks swarmed over to eat, enjoying it immensely. King Ian watched beside them, feeling more satisfied than eating his own meal. He rinsed the cutting board and knife, tidied up the courtyard, and prepared to rest in the house for a while. Just then, someone knocked on the courtyard door. King Ian heard a familiar voice outside asking, "Is King Ian at home?" The smile on King Ian's face gradually faded. He pursed his lips for a moment before reluctantly responding, "Yes," and then went to open the courtyard door. Shen Min stood outside with a small basket on his arm. Seeing King Ian open the door, he smiled and said, "I just picked some chili peppers from the field. I heard your family doesn't grow them, so I brought some over." King Ian smiled back at him, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He stepped aside and said, "Come in and have a seat." Shen Min smiled and entered. Looking at the grapevines climbing high along the fence on the edge of the courtyard, green and lush, he couldn't help but exclaim, "The grape seedlings in your house grow so well. The ones in my house didn't grow at all." King Ian smiled and said, "Yes." Shen Min glanced at him, lowered his eyelids, and when he raised them again, he smiled faintly. But as soon as he turned his back to King Ian, his expression quickly turned melancholy. It wasn't until he sat down at the table in the outer room that King Ian brought over the basket of chili peppers that he quickly stood up and said with a smile, "It's nothing special, don't dislike it." King Ian returned the basket to him, sat down opposite him at the table, and asked, "How has your family been recently? I heard that the village chief and a few elderly people have allocated 10 acres of land to your family." Shen Min nodded and said, "The land at home was all sold by Wang Heiyao. Seeing that we couldn't even eat, the village chief said we couldn't watch us starve to death, so he divided 10 acres of land from various families for us. But this is a debt. We have to slowly repay the money to buy the land in the future." He lowered his head. "Having land to cultivate is already good. At least we can have enough to eat. The village chief also arranged for me to buy seeds and fertilizers. However, it's too late to plant rice or sweet potatoes. Last month, I planted chili peppers, cucumbers, persimmons, and loofahs. We can eat them until late autumn. I can sell some of them later to make a living." King Ian nodded and said, "That's good." After that, the two fell silent. King Ian looked down at the table with his eyes lowered, not saying another word or driving anyone away, but his attitude was clearly not as warm as before. Shen Min's expression also became solemn. After a while, his voice became slightly hoarse. "Just now, someone from the county came to our house and delivered a letter. Wang Heiyao has been sentenced to be executed after the autumn trial." King Ian looked at him sharply. Shen Min lowered his head, and a smile gradually appeared on his lips. "His mother heard the news and fainted. When I left home, she was lying on the ground crying." Shen Min looked at King Ian and said, "I'm sure you've figured out my situation. I'm sorry for you and your husband." He didn't elaborate on the specifics. By not saying it out loud, they could pretend they never knew, and there wouldn't be any trouble in the future. King Ian's lips twitched. He lowered his eyes and said, "I know you're in a difficult situation." Tears suddenly flowed from Shen Min's eyes like a small stream. He said, "I don't expect you to treat me the same as before, but if you ever need me in the future, just let me know, and I will do my best." With that, Shen Min wiped his face, stood up, and was about to leave. Before leaving, he wanted to say something, but after biting his lip, he decided not to. With red eyes, he turned around and walked out quickly. That night, Wang Heiyao, who was drunk, sat on the ground outside the house like a dead dog, took a hammer, and treated a low stool as if it were a human head, hammering it fiercely. As he hammered, he muttered in a low voice, "First kill that bitch, then slaughter that miserly old lady without a penny, hide the hammer in that ugly freak's house, and go to the county office to report it. The ugly freak gets beheaded, I don't want the little beauty anymore. They'll all get beheaded together, the house and shop will all be mine, and no one will bother me again in the future. Shen Min crouched behind the door, feeling chills down his spine as he listened. The next day, he brought back 2 catties of pig hindquarters, hinting and guiding Wang Hao over and over again. But Shen Min thought that there was no point in talking about these things. It wouldn't change the fact that he had schemed and used King Yan and his husband. 7 or 8 days later, old lady Wang passed away. She had been groaning in bed for several days before Shen Min called a doctor. The doctor shook his head after checking her and advised to prepare for her final arrangements. Recently, old lady Wang's family had encountered these 2 incidents, which made everyone who heard about it sigh and lament. The villagers nearby scraped together some money for Shen Min. Unable to afford an expensive coffin, they wrapped her in a mat and hired someone to pull the cart, scattering paper money along the way. She was buried at the foot of the mountain on the road out of the village, next to her deceased husband. After the burial, Shen Min cleaned out everything from old lady Wang's house that could be sold and threw away what was useless. Shen Min took the bunch of keys from old lady Wang and opened all the cupboard doors one by one. After searching to the bottom, he didn't find a single penny. With people gone, past grievances no longer mattered. Everything ended. Old lady Wang passed away in the early hours of the morning. No one knew that before she died, the old lady lying in bed unable to get up had once gotten out of bed. She didn't have much strength at that time. She staggered to the woodshed in the yard, found a cloth bag under the firewood pile, and then took a shovel to dig a deep hole, step by step. Then she brought the cloth bag back, and her demise suddenly lit up. She held it in her arms for a while. Afterwards, she opened the cloth bag and found it was filled with shining silver. Old lady Wang patiently counted them one by one, exactly 100 taels. After counting, she touched them with satisfaction. After that, she closed the cloth bag, wrapped it in a grass mat from the bed, and put it into the deep hole she had just dug out. After burying the soil back and patting it down, the floor of the house was originally made of soil, and people walked over it every day, so it was not flat. After she finished it, there were no traces left. After old lady Wang finished this task, she didn't forget to hold her breath and put the shovel back to the yard, wiping the soles of her shoes clean before lying back on the bed. Less than 2 hours later, she passed away. Wang Hao was a troublesome person, and she knew it was all her fault for spoiling him, but things had come to this point, and she couldn't do anything about it. She knew she couldn't touch the money in her hands. If she did, she wouldn't be able to live anymore. If Wang Hao knew she had this money, he would probably lose it all in one night. She had to hide it well. After hiding it for so many years, this money had become her obsession. She held on to this silver for her whole life. Now that she was dead, no one could use it. As long as the house wasn't torn down and the foundation wasn't dug up, no one could get it. Old lady Wang died without regrets, feeling satisfied. Chapter 46. As midsummer arrived, all the windows were open, the beds were covered with bamboo mats and bamboo pillows, but despite this, it still felt hot when sleeping. Chu Hinian wanted to hold King Ian, but he was always pushed away, King Ian finding his body temperature too high. In the first half of the night, Chu Hinian kept fanning him. Finally, it cooled down in the second half of the night, and both could sleep peacefully. These days, the vegetables in the field were just finished harvesting the first batch and the second batch was not yet ripe. For a while, both had some leisure time and could sleep until they woke naturally. Before the roosters started crowing in the morning, Chu Hinian got up to close all the windows and pull the bed curtains. When he returned to bed, he saw King Yan had turned over, pulling all the blankets away, and sitting between his curled legs. After the weather turned hot, he changed from sleeping in his underwear to a lighter cloth that barely covered his back, secured by a fragile string, a few strands of long hair wrapped around it. Chu Hinian watched quietly for a while, wanting to remove it for him, but hesitated to touch the thin strap, eventually retracting his hand. King Yan's legs were also bare, long and straight, shining white, almost glowing, irresistibly attracting the gaze lingering above them like a magnet. Watching this, Chu Hinian's Adam's apple moved slightly, helplessly smiling to himself, forcing himself to lie down and not look at the little beauty beside him anymore. Since King Yan had a stomachache a few days ago, Chu Henian had helped him wash for a few days, and King Yan gradually became less reserved. He probably felt that since he had been seen so thoroughly, there was no need to be modest anymore, and simply did whatever was comfortable. But King Yan didn't know that the man sleeping beside him tossed and turned for a long time every night before falling asleep. After a while, the roosters outside started crowing, still audible through the windows, but King Yan was not at all disturbed, sleeping soundly, breathing evenly without moving. Chu Henian lay awake with his eyes open, tired but unable to sleep. Listening to the occasional soft snoring beside him, Chu Henian hated it so much that he was itching to the point of his teeth not itching yet. He finally sat up, bent over, and used his mouth to lightly bite the part of King Yan's body with the most flesh. But it wasn't enough. The itch of his teeth still persisted, and Chu Henian took a deep breath, giving in to his inner craving, and bit down slightly harder. "What's wrong?" King Yan was finally awakened by the bite, groggy as he propped himself up on his elbow and turned to look back. Chu Henian quickly raised his head and replied, "Nothing, just a mosquito." Chu Henian couldn't bear to bite too hard. King Yan didn't wake up completely. He just said oh and lay back on the pillow, falling asleep again in no time. Today was overcast, a rare breeze blowing. Li Sheng was drying the sheets in the yard and looked up at the sky, saying, "This rain won't come down until at least evening." Taking advantage of the cooler weather, King Yan wanted to go to town. This time, it was purely for fun, no need to push a cart. On the way, he ran into Lu Fa, who said he was also going, so they went back together to call his wife. Shi Yanlan was still in the early stages of pregnancy, unstable, and unable to travel far. Lu Fa's wife asked what he wanted to buy and promised to bring it back to him. Lu Fa's wife was a tolerant and reasonable person who had always been good to her sister-in-law. Shi Yanlan was gentle and obedient, and they got along well. Shi Yanlan didn't pretend to be polite anymore, and said sincerely to her sister-in-law, "I want to eat the sourdough cake from the pastry shop on the east side of town." Lu Fa's wife responded with a no, not standing on ceremony since her sister-in-law wasn't, and replied, "Don't you like to eat pork intestines? I'll go to the butcher's shop and see if they have any. I'll stew you a bull when I come back." Shi Yanlan nodded happily and said, When the tofu workshop was busy, Lu Fa's 3 children were all taken care of by their grandmother. Lu Fa and his wife took the opportunity to visit occasionally and stayed for a few days. Lu Fa was famous for being good to his wife, and there was a reason for that. With no elders in his own family, his wife's family had helped a lot, and he knew how to be grateful. As the 2 families strolled and chatted, they headed towards town. Lu Fa's wife and King Yan walked ahead, asking how busy the fields were. King Yan said all the vegetables were picked, and they were taking a break. After a few days, the green onions would grow, and they could go back to the fields to pick them. Lu Fa's wife nodded and said, "You and your husband are capable. Even if you hire someone, it's not easy to work in the fields. When my family's land wasn't rented out a few years ago, my back couldn't straighten from the work. These past 2 years, because the tofu workshop has become busier, I haven't had time to manage it, but renting it out is quite worry-free. It's just that we don't earn as much as we would if we planted it ourselves." After a while, she seemed to remember something, furrowing her brows and saying, "But this winter, our family's land will be taken back. We won't rent it out anymore." "Why?" King Yan asked, "Planning to plant it yourself?" Lu Fa's wife shook her head, sighed, and gestured behind her with her chin, saying, "His relatives will be moving here in 2 months. They have no roots here at all. With enough people at the tofu workshop, arranging for more people to come in won't earn much. So our 2 families discussed it and decided to lease our 60 acres of land to them. We won't charge rent, and we'll take it back when their family gets settled." Hearing this, King Yan frowned slightly, glanced at her, wanted to say something but didn't. Lu Fa's wife understood his expression and said, "Relatives also have to be clear about accounts. Once they start planting on this land, it's likely we won't be able to get it back easily in the future. After all, who wants to let go of meat that's already in their mouth?" She sighed again. Back then, old Lu's family fled the war and sought refuge elsewhere. This family didn't treat them well. Otherwise, my father-in-law wouldn't have died so soon. But if it weren't for them, the past few days wouldn't have been so difficult to endure. At least they gave us a roof over our heads. In the end, there's still a debt of gratitude. If this land can't be taken back, my two brothers-in-law have already accepted it." Behind them, Lu Fa also heard their conversation and chimed in, "That's my father's brother's son's family. I have to call him brother." Besides the husband and wife, there are also two children, twins, one son and one daughter. They should be about 17 or 18 years old now. They are indeed close relatives. Otherwise, we wouldn't have sought refuge with their family back then, he sighed. "I don't want to mention past grievances anymore, it only brings heartache." Chu Hinian patted his shoulder reassuringly, "Just aim to have a clear conscience." Lu Fa nodded heavily, "That's all we can do." As they chatted, they didn't feel tired at all, and soon arrived in town. They first went to the bookstore. Otherwise, carrying so many bags wouldn't be convenient. Recently, King Ian had become fascinated with biographies and stories of martial arts adventures, so he went deep inside to pick and browse. Lu Fa's wife wasn't very interested in books and casually flipped through medical books near the entrance. Luan went inside and whispered with the shopkeeper. After a while, he went to Chu Hinian, nudged his shoulder, winked, and said for him to follow the boss to the back room of the bookstore to see the collection. Chu Hinian trusted him and went along. But upon entering, he saw the shopkeeper smiling broadly, taking out a box. When he opened it, it was filled with books without titles. Chu Hinian glanced back at Lu Fa, who grinned exactly like the shopkeeper, mischievously toothy. Chu Hinian turned around and walked away. Lu Fa grabbed his arm and stuffed a book into his arms. "I asked the shopkeeper to specially set this aside for you. Take it and read it when you go back." Chu Hinian swiftly pushed the book back. "No need, I'm not very interested." Lu Fa still didn't let go. "It's really good stuff, much better than last time. Don't believe me? Open and take a look." "No need. Just take a look." "I won't." "Hey, don't be sorry, aren't I doing it for you?" Lu Fa opened the book to a certain page, insisting, "I'll open it for you. Look at this page." "Don't open it." Chu Hinian rejected as he walked towards the room adjoining the front hall, accidentally colliding with King Yan who was about to enter. At the same time, Lu Fa threw the book open at a certain page into Chu Hinian's arms. He instinctively caught it. King Yan looked down instinctively. Chu Hinian didn't have time to close the book and simply lifted his hand to cover King Yan's eyes, saying, "Don't look." The room fell quiet for a moment. Lu Fa scratched his head and deftly took the book from Chu Hinian's other hand, hiding it behind his back. At this moment, King Yan spoke softly, "I didn't see anything." After saying that, he removed Chu Hinian's hand covering his eyes, turned around, and walked away with his head down. As he walked away, his cheeks were flushed. After leaving the bookstore, they went to a shop selling hair ornaments and earrings. Lu Fa's wife was dazzled by the variety and liked everything, calling her husband over for advice. King Ian would occasionally deal in such goods when setting up stalls, and he was familiar with most styles, so he wasn't very interested. He stood nearby waiting, and Chu Hinian waited with him. After a while, King Ian's gaze fell on his own shoe tip. He cleared his throat and asked softly, "Do you like that one?" Chu Hinian also coughed lightly, "No." King Ian quickly glanced up at him, then lowered his head again. "It's okay, if you like it, just buy it. I don't mind." Chu Hinian looked conflicted. "Really, I don't." Silence fell between them. Over at the hair ornament shop, Lu Fa's wife was putting a pearl flower on her head, and Lu Fa was paying the shopkeeper. It looked like they were about to finish their purchase. Suddenly, King Ian spoke again, "I saw it." Chu Hinian turned to look at him. "Saw what?" He thought King Ian was referring to seeing the book open to that page just now. King Ian blushed even more, answering, "The other day when I was tidying up, I saw the book you hid in Dad's cabinet." Chu Hinian felt his head buzzing for the first time. King Ian glanced up at him again. This time, he took a step closer, took the money pouch from his waist, took out a couple of silver coins, and placed them in Chu Hinian's hand. King Ian said, "This money is for you. Spend it however you like." Chu Hinian wanted to return the money, but King Ian dodged away. Before he left, King Ian bit his lip with his head down, hesitating to say, "Don't buy too much, it's not good for your health." Chapter 47. Of course, that booklet wasn't purchased. In order to sleep well that night, Chu Hinian bought a piece of cloth that could cover his back for King Ian with the 2 silver coins. King Ian blushed again. When they came out of the shop, he whispered in Chu Hinian's ear, "So, you like this?" Chu Hinian didn't understand and looked at him in confusion. King Ian said, "Just now in the bookstore, on that page, isn't the person wearing the style you bought?" Chu Hinian once again felt that buzzing sensation in his head. He hadn't really seen what was on that page just now. This matter was already unclear. He gritted his teeth and simply responded with a to acknowledge it, forcing himself not to care about King Ian. I knew it expression. At the pastry shop, Lu Fa's wife was buying sour jujube cakes, and King Ian wanted to eat mung bean cakes. These things were cool and refreshing, sweet and crispy to eat directly, and when soaked in water, they turned into mung bean soup, a very good summer dessert. So he had the clerk weigh out 7 or 8 pieces. With these purchases almost done, the weather outside was getting gloomier. It just so happened that Lu Fa's ox cart was almost ready to deliver tofu. They were ready to leave. Just then, a middle-aged woman's voice came from outside the pastry shop, loudly saying, "You bought the book you wanted, the clothes too, and you still want to eat lotus seed cakes. Fine, I'll buy them for you. But can you please make more progress in your studies? Your father has asked me several times how you manage to spend so much money every month. You need to give me an answer in front of your father, don't you?" "Oh, Mom, don't say these things outside. It's not good if people hear," complained a young man's voice. "You're still afraid of people hearing? Your father sees that you're useless. The 2 taels of silver from before New Year are almost gone. Now he's starting to regret that decision and is complaining to me. If you don't improve yourself, how will your mother live in the future?" As she spoke, the woman and the young man who spoke entered the pastry shop. Both groups of people inside and outside the room just happened to come face to face, and the woman first froze when she saw the situation inside the room, and then stiffly smiled and said, "Oh, isn't this Wang Jialang and King Ian?" The young man who had just entered the door was also stunned, and his impatient expression turned into embarrassment. He muttered, "Brother." Chu Hinian nodded at them and stood still. King Ian walked out from behind him and also put on a fake smile, saying, "What a coincidence to meet you here." The woman then realized and looked up and down at King Ian. King Ian loved beauty and dressed up a bit today. He wore a silk robe, a jade hairpin on his head, and a jade bracelet on his wrist. His face was fair and tender, with a hint of a smile. He didn't look like a villager from a remote village at all, but rather like a young gentleman from a wealthy family. The woman's gaze lingered on King Ian's head and wrists for a long time, and later came to the large and small bags in Chu Hinian's hands, especially the oil paper packaging from the meat and fish store that she wasn't willing to leave. "King Ian, do you know these people?" Lu Fa's wife asked curiously. King Ian glanced at her and smiled. "They're acquaintances." This woman was the stepmother of the original owner, Zhou Yanli, who was remarried to Wu Fengtong. The young man was the original owner's half-brother, Wu Qingxi. Zhou Yanli had a distinctive appearance but a harsh demeanor. She had a reason to marry into the Wu family. Her father was the county executioner and earned a lot of silver, but his status was low. Ordinary families despised such backgrounds. After Wu Fengtong's original wife passed away due to illness, he had not found a suitable match. Later, he happened to see Zhou Yanli, who was past marriageable age and had no suitors. Despite her family's low status, he hurriedly proposed and they became a couple because he coveted her looks. Zhou Yanli had been physically abusive to the original owner since childhood. When he grew up and dared not hit him anymore, she still regarded him as a thorn in her side and mistreated him in various ways. Originally, she wasn't so malicious, but the original owner was too clever. Her own son was also incompetent, and she worried that if the original owner prospered in the future, after Wu Fengtong died, he might come to trouble her. So she took the initiative to suppress him, marrying him off to the worst family, ensuring he would never rise again. Earlier, Wu Qingxi had accidentally mentioned that he had seen his brother and that ugly man on the street a few days ago. He also said that his brother had changed. He no longer spoke silently and gloomily as before. He dressed like the young men in the county. Zhou Yanli said that Wu Qingxi was talking nonsense, but she felt uncomfortable inside. She hadn't slept well that night. She also went to inquire with acquaintances who had relatives in Liuxi village, and when she heard the good news, she was furious. She said that King Ian and Chu Henian were living a prosperous life in Liuxi village. There weren't many families in Liuxi village who could compare with them. Not only were they living well, but she also heard that families who had good relations with them were also benefiting. She thought that by marrying King Yan into this family, Chu Henian, a rough blacksmith, and King Yan's high spirit, this day was doomed to be troublesome. Unexpectedly, the situation she had anticipated did not occur. After listening, Zhou Yanling almost went to Liuxi village several times to see for herself. Seeing it today, she found that this brother looked much better than before he was married. He completely didn't look like someone who had been tortured. There were many people in the shop, and she was originally hesitant, but King Yan had just shown that indifferent appearance. She also remembered that she used to scold him and hit him, and he never dared to talk back. Her anger came up all at once. In front of everyone in the shop, she sarcastically said, "Your father has been thinking about you recently, and he hasn't seen you come home during the holidays and festivals." Her eyes turned to the things in Chu Henian's hands. She swallowed saliva and said quietly, "I don't know how you raised such a large child. Have you ever thought about your father and your brother during the day when you eat so much?" Anyone could hear the sarcasm behind her words. Lu Fa's wife didn't understand who the two people in front of her were until now, and then looked at the two people again. King Yan's marriage to this family had been discussed in the village for a while. Although they just know the inside story, this stepmother's husband's marriage is a nail on the head. What happened at the Yuja Gate a while ago, they also heard. Originally thought we would never interact again until death, didn't expect things to turn out like this today. In Lu Fa's wife's heart, she understood that this stepmother was not well regarded, but she couldn't interfere in other people's family matters. She just listened and observed how King Yan would respond. Under the scrutiny of several pairs of eyes, King Yan was questioned like this. It was obvious he was being labeled as unfilial, but his expression remained calm. He took a step forward, adjusted the cuff of his shirt casually, and said, "Have you spent all the money when you sold me?" Zhou Yanling's face flushed red. "You." She pointed at him, trembling with anger. King Yan's words hit her sore spot directly. She hadn't expected King Yan to be so sharp-tongued now, leaving her momentarily unsure how to retort. At this moment, Wu Qingxi, behind her, took 2 steps forward, his face also flushed. With a reasonable demeanor, he said, "Brother, how could you say something so harsh? We are family, and children should be filial to their parents. Even if parents have faults, we should not harbor resentment." King Yan nodded slightly, his expression changed slightly, appearing sorrowful. "Brother is right. I know my father has been kind to me. But just as Henian and I started our family, our savings at home were depleted." He looked meaningfully at the robes worn by the mother and son, clearly recently purchased. It was obvious where the family's savings had gone, both the mother and son avoiding eye contact. He sighed deeply. "Father pitied me and was afraid I would look bad wearing old and worn-out clothes from home, so he didn't even provide a single robe for my dowry. Unable to bear seeing our poor appearance, he didn't allow me to return home. Only when he heard that we were managing fine these days did he allow me to come back to visit. It was my fault for not distinguishing between inside and outside matters. Although outsiders helped us, how could it compare to Father's kindness? Father has been studying all his life, living by principles, so he surely understands better than I do. It was my fault as a child." With that, he turned back and took a package from Chu Henian's hand. After opening it and grabbing something inside, he smiled at Zhou Yanli, whose face alternated between red and pale white. "Could you please deliver this to Father on my behalf as an apology?" Zhou Yanli subconsciously reached out, and King Yan placed a handful of melon seeds in her palm. Her expression changed immediately. King Yan smiled mischievously. "Tell Father that this is my filial gift to him. Ask him to take it easy on eating them, preferably lasting until the end of the year. By then, I'll consider whether to visit him again and show him more filial respect." Laughter erupted in the shop. Zhou Yanli felt embarrassed and angry, her face flushing red. She threw the melon seeds on the ground and aimed her sharp nails at King Ian's face. They were very close, and King Ian couldn't avoid it or react in time to block it. Just as her nails were about to reach his face, a large hand reached out from behind him with a loud slap, blocking Zhou Yanling's hand back. She cried out in pain and took 2 steps back. At this moment, Wu Qingshi was in a hurry. His eyes were red, pointing at Chu Hinian beside King Ian. "How dare you hit my mother? I'll fight you." With that, he was about to rush forward. Chu Hinian didn't retreat but instead moved forward, stepping past King Ian, standing in front of him with a straight posture and a firm gaze, facing the young man rushing towards him. Halfway through, Wu Qingshi suddenly stopped in his tracks, his eyes evasive. He flusteredly bluffed, "Just wait and see, I'll call someone to deal with you." With that, he dragged his tearful mother and turned to run out of the shop. The mother and son left in embarrassment, and the farce ended. Liu Fa walked over and patted Chu Hinian on the shoulder. His wife sighed and said, "Every family has their own troubles." On the way back, the atmosphere was subdued for a while. Just as the ox cart entered the village, raindrops began to fall. Chu Hinian and Liu Fa hurriedly bid farewell, taking King Ian off the cart. The two of them protected what they were carrying and hurried back home. Upon entering the house, their clothes were soaked through, not cold but uncomfortable, sticking to their bodies. Chu Hinian put down what they were carrying and handed King Ian a towel to quickly dry off. He himself took off his soaked outer robe and went to the outer room to light a fire and boil water. The firewood was dry, and the fire burned particularly brightly. It didn't take long for the water in the pot to start simmering. Chu Hinian brought out the bathtub, scooped water to wash and drain it repeatedly. After preparing everything, the water was nearly boiling. He moved the bathtub into the inner room. Inside the room, King Ian finished drying his hair, letting it hang loose over his shoulders. He wrapped a blanket around himself, sitting at the edge of the bed, lost in thought. Seeing Chu Hinian bringing the bathtub over, he stood up to help, but was pushed back by the other's arm. "You just recovered from illness not long ago. Don't catch another cold. Sit there and wait, I'll do it." King Ian had no choice but to sit back by the bedside, watching Chu Hinian work. Watching, he lost himself in thought again. After everything was ready, Chu Hinian let King Ian wash first. It was then that King Ian came back to himself. Chu Hinian thought to wait outside as usual, but was stopped when he heard King Ian call out to him. "Hinian," King Ian said softly. Chu Hinian stopped in his tracks, turned to look, and as soon as he saw, his eyes widened slightly, and his breathing became a bit hurried. The blanket on King Ian's body fell to the ground. Underneath, he wore nothing but the new Chu Hinian likes very much underbelly. Chu Hinian thought that this underbelly should at least cover half of the spine, and now that it was on his husband's body, he realized that there was much more fabric on the back of this underbelly, perhaps cut from the front. It was not yet dark, and King Ian was somewhat embarrassed. He used his white arms to partially cover himself in front, his eyes moist, and asked softly, "Don't you like it?" Chu Hinian's throat rolled, and he answered heavily, King Ian smiled slightly, "It hasn't been soaked yet. I'm afraid you'd be anxious, so I put it on first to show you. Later when I bathe, I'll wash it too." Chu Hinian swallowed hard, forced himself to look away, his voice hoarse and fast. "I've seen it, you go ahead and wash, call me when you're done." He wanted to leave, but King Ian called him again, this time calling him husband. Chu Hinian halted his steps again, listening intently to his deadly husband call. With a soft tone, he remarked, "It's so troublesome to do things step by step. We can just do them together." Veins began to bulge on Chu Hinian's forehead. He closed his eyes, struggled to contain himself, but couldn't resist any longer. Abruptly turning around, he strode up to King Ian, his hand gripping King Ian's soft waist. His voice lowered, tinged with a hint of threat, "Are you trying to get pregnant?" King Ian looked up at him and quickly denied, "No, I haven't prepared." Chu Hinian cut him off, lowering his head to bite King Ian's lip, a real bite that caused some pain. Tears welled up in King Ian's eyes from the pain. Chu Hinian released him, his breath heavy, almost menacingly saying, "Provoke me again, and I'll..." He didn't finish his sentence, instead lightly kissing King Ian's lips and quickly exiting the room. King Ian stood in place, his face, neck, and chest flushed red. It wasn't intentional, it just happened in the heat of the moment. His face was burning, a blush of embarrassment even showing. He dared not think about the rest of the sentence and hurried to distract himself by taking a bath. Once both had finished bathing, Chu Hinian put on his undergarments, lifted the bed curtain, and found Qingyan sitting at the head of the bed, his brow furrowed in thought. Chu Hinian sat down beside him, helping to tidy his disheveled hair, and asked, "You've been restless since we got back. What's on your mind?" At his words, Qingyan turned to look at him, slightly embarrassed, and pursed his lips. "It's nothing." Seeing he didn't want to talk about it, Chu Hinian didn't press further and concentrated on drying Qingyan's hair. However, King Ian couldn't keep it in, slapping his body onto the cool mat with frustration. "I wasn't mentally prepared to meet the mother and son at the pastry shop today. The argument was really unseemly, it could have been handled much better." Chu Hinian set aside the towel and regarded him with a complex gaze. "So, since we returned home, you've been thinking about this?" Qingyan nodded. "Let me tell you, Hinian, next time," he gestured with his hands, "if there's a next time, I'll make sure it goes 100 times better than this." After saying this, Qingyan stared at him with shining eyes. Chu Hinian understood he needed to respond, so his lips moved. "Then I wish you success?" Chapter 48. That day, Qinlan brought the child back to her parents' home. Before Qingyan and her husband could sit down, she handed the child to her mother and came over to their side. After closing the door, Qinlan looked around to see if her mother was in the courtyard. She lowered her voice and said, "Yesterday, Xiao's letter arrived." Qingyan paused in pouring water for her and asked, "How is it over there? Has he reached Nanhai?" Qinlan nodded. "The letter was written from Nanhai. He met my father." Qingyan noticed her choice of words and exchanged a glance with Chu Hinian, who had just sat down after going to boil water. "Are you sure that the official in Nanhai is your father?" Qinlan was somewhat emotional. She said, "Xiao said that the magistrate looks almost identical to my father's portrait. Xiao showed him portraits of my mother and me. He was very excited when he saw my mother's portrait and called me by my childhood nickname, Lancy, when he saw mine." Qingyan pushed the teacup toward her and said, "It seems it's true." Qinlan's eyes reddened, holding the teacup with trembling fingertips. "I never expected that after so many years, he would still be in this world, unable to remember anything, yet always trying to find us." Chu Hinian had been silent all this time, listening. It was only now that his pupils moved slightly, looking at Qinlan. He asked, "Did the letter say what happened back then?" Qinlan made a sound of agreement and calmed her emotions a bit. She continued, "Xiao briefly wrote in the letter that when my father finished selling furs and was returning, he encountered bandits and was robbed on the mountain several tens of kilometers from here. The bandits thought he was dead, took his belongings, and left. However, someone saved him. The person who saved him was an official who was then serving in a place called Nanshan County near Nanhai. My father was unconscious. The official didn't dare leave him in the county below the mountain for fear the bandits would come back and silence him. Unable to delay his journey, he took my father southward, planning to let him recover and give him some money before returning by himself. But by the time my father woke up, he had forgotten everything and feared the bandits, so he went along with the official to Nansheng and served there. While there, my father helped the official with his work and they became very close. Later, when the official was promoted, he was transferred to Nanhai County as a registrar. 2 years ago, the official helped him buy off his official position, and he became the magistrate of Nanhai County. During his time as a registrar, he began to remember bits of his past, but he couldn't recall which county or village he came from, so he had to rely on northern caravans to find my mother. After listening to Qinlan's story, Chu Hinian fell into contemplation for a while before saying, "So, neither Qinshu nor that official could confirm if he lost his memory due to encountering bandits. Most of this is speculation based on the scene by that official." Qinlan thought for a moment and said, "That's right." The room fell silent for a moment. Chu Hinian lowered his head slightly, his brows furrowed, lost in thought. Clearing his throat, Qingyan asked, "Lan Jie, what are you and your husband planning to do now?" Qinlan came precisely to discuss this matter. She said, "I came to discuss this matter with you." Ah Xiao said the caravan will be returning in half a month, and with travel time, they should be home in a little over a month. My father plans to return with them. Ah Xiao asked me to decide and see how to tell my mother about this. King Yan furrowed his brows in thought, wanting to say something but hesitated. If it were just because Qin Liangchuan lost his memory, there wouldn't be a need to discuss how to tell Aunt Li. It seems there are other hidden issues. Sure enough, Qin Lan sighed deeply and said, the year my father took office as magistrate, that official promoted him and gave him a concubine. Now, that concubine has a child who is almost 2 years old. After Qin Lan left, King Yan's mood worsened considerably. From Shen Min's affair to Aunt Li's ordeal, King Yan felt the conflict between modern thinking and the outdated and rigid social norms of this era. They were like two gears turning slowly in opposite directions. They could operate smoothly when kept apart, but once they collided, the forces pushing in opposite directions would lock them together, emitting a sluggish, grating sound and sparking terrifying friction. If King Yan made the decision, he might choose to forever keep it from Aunt Li, pretending that Qin Liangchuan had truly died back then. However, it wasn't appropriate for Qin Liangchuan to want to acknowledge his wife and daughter without telling Aunt Li the truth, denying her the right to choose. Qin Lan was determined to acknowledge her biological father, but she was unsure how to broach the subject with her mother. Feeling troubled, King Yan didn't give Qin Lan any advice. Chu Hinian also remained silent. In the end, she decided to delay, as there was still over a month left. Telling her mother too early would likely disturb her for the rest of the month. After Qin Lan left, Chu Hinian also remained unusually silent. When King Yan finally snapped out of his thoughts, he realized the other person hadn't moved from the table, his brow furrowed tightly, gaze fixed on the tabletop, obviously deep in thought. King Yan didn't disturb him, got up to add firewood to the stove, washed his hands, and prepared dinner. The weather was hot, and his appetite wasn't good. He planned to cook cold noodles. A few days ago, he had bought buckwheat noodles in town. He cooked them directly in cold water, then soaked them in icy well water, added some spicy sauce made by Aunt Li, shredded cucumber, chopped cilantro, salt, vinegar for seasoning, and a bit of sugar for freshness. The flavors were rich, sour, sweet, salty, and spicy, simple, refreshing, and appetizing. Just as King Yan poured water into the pot, Chu Hinian heard the movement and came back to his senses. He took a low stool and sat down by the stove, helping to pump the bellows. King Yan glanced at him, and Chu Hinian brushed off some dry grass crumbs stuck to his hair near his ear, casually tucking them into his waistband. King Yan's eyes widened slightly. Chu Hinian quickly realized what he had done, hurriedly took out the grass stick, threw it into the stove, and smiled, was lost in thought. At midnight, King Yan was sleeping soundly when he suddenly woke up inexplicably startled. He opened his eyes and saw a vague, tall dark figure sitting beside him. It was Chu Hinian. King Yan also sat up and asked, "What's wrong? Can't sleep?" He reached out to touch Chu Hinian's cheek but found it covered in cold sweat. A chill ran through King Yan as he quickly got out of bed, lit an oil lamp, and partially drew the bed curtain. When he returned to bed, he saw Chu Hinian sitting there, his face unusually pale. The scars on his face looked even darker and more terrifying against his sweat-soaked skin. His breathing was rapid, and his eyes held a look of indescribable despair and pain. King Yan hurriedly got out of bed again, fetched a cloth, and sat beside him to gently wipe his face and neck. He then fetched clean undergarments and softly said, "Let me help you change." Chu Hinian didn't move. When King Yan tried to undo the string of his undergarment, Chu Hinian grabbed King Yan's hand and pulled him into his embrace, holding him tightly. It was almost painful for King Yan, but he reached around and hugged him back, obediently leaning on him. Fortunately, Chu Hinian quickly realized he was exerting too much force. He eased his grip, held King Yan's waist with both hands, lifted him onto his thigh, and gently comforted him, as if soothing a child. "Sorry," Chu Hinian whispered near King Yan's ear. He seemed to like this posture and action, comforting the person in his arms while perhaps healing himself. Hearing this, King Yan shook his head gently and asked cautiously, "What's wrong with you?" Chu Hinian's lips tightened. After a while, he replied, "I had a nightmare. It was all blood." King Yan looked up at him. "Whose blood?" Animals or humans? Chu Hinian shook his head. I don't know. But the blood. It was agonizing. I could hardly breathe in my dream. When the pain became unbearable, I woke up. This time, King Ian held him tightly, his slender and fair hands constantly stroking behind his head and ears. His fingertips and palms were soft and warm. King Ian leaned against his neck and softly sang, "Snore, snore, don't be scared, snore, snore, just be scared for a while." He repeated it over and over, speaking slowly and gently. The oil lamp on the round table beside the bed cast a dim yellow light inside the curtain, projecting their shadows leaning against the bed's backboard. After a while, Chu Hinian's hand, which was on King Ian's waist, moved to his back. With his knees bent, King Ian sat slightly higher on his thigh, hands on his shoulders, gazing at him attentively. Chu Hinian cleared his throat and said, "King Ian, kiss me." King Ian's eyelashes trembled. He obediently bent his head down and pressed his soft, full lips against Chu Hinian's. Chu Hinian parted his lips, grasping King Ian's delicate and fragile neck, taking control in turn. His hand inadvertently slipped under King Ian's undergarment. It had been too long since they had been this intimate, and King Ian was overwhelmed with nostalgia, almost moved to tears, his calves tensed, and his toes curled. But after a short while, that hand restrained itself and withdrew from under the garment. King Ian hummed discontentedly. Chu Hinian's warm hand gently rubbed his back, comforting him, and he closed his eyes, almost whispering to King Ian's ear, "Be good, you might get pregnant." Ignoring him, King Ian got off Chu Hinian, retrieved a black wrist guard from the depths of the bed, and blushed as he placed it on Chu Hinian's wrist. Biting his lip, he said, "Just once today. It's not necessarily that easy." Chu Hinian's already shaky will collapsed completely. Once again, he held King Ian's chin tightly, kissing him fiercely. They couldn't remember how many days had passed since they last did this. King Ian thought he wanted to, but he didn't dare. He felt like those alfalfa plants by the fence outside the window, baked by the sun, thirsty, and almost dry. Now, after rain and dew, they had risen again, shaking and swaying. During the process, King Ian couldn't remember how many times he had pinched his wrist guard. It wasn't until the end that he closed his eyes tightly and tried to slow down his breathing that he realized what had happened at the most critical juncture just now. He endured the trembling of his muscles, leaned his hand behind him, and touched the wetness of his hand. King Ian sat up all at once and looked at Chu Helian in disbelief. Because King Ian was too afraid of being pregnant with a child, at that moment, Chu Hinian seemed to have regained consciousness and controlled himself. Chapter 49. The summers in the north are short. After entering August, the weather no longer feels as oppressively hot. In the mornings and evenings, one might even need to wear a light robe over a thin shirt, though it remains sweaty around noon. There's no need to work in the fields daily now. Having an interval every few days was enough. The blacksmith's shop has reopened. It's not yet harvest time, so there's not much work in the fields. If needed, Chu Hinian goes out early by himself and returns after finishing. King Ian prepares breakfast just right, and they eat together. Then he heads out to the shop. Once Chu Hinian leaves, King Ian grabs a small basket and goes with Gi Yunyang and Autumn Lady to the mountains to gather ferns. The early August ferns were still tender. After blanching them in boiling water, they're mixed with chili oil and minced garlic, offering a taste and texture different from common wild vegetables, very delicious. These ferns were not cheap. After gathering enough for their own tasting at home, they sold the rest, which brought in a decent little income. On this day, they also found a pleasant surprise, a large patch of sorghum fruit among the trees. Each fruit was not large but bright red, juicy, and delicious. They each picked a lot of sorghum fruit to take home, only regretting that the basket wasn't big enough. Back home, King Ian put the sorghum fruit directly into the basket and hung it on the clothesline to wash off the water scoop by scoop. After taking out a large handful, he put it in a basin, added white sugar, smashed and mixed the fruit until evenly coated with sugar, then poured it into a large bowl and chilled it in the freshly drawn cold well water. In the evening, when Chu Hinian returned, he saw his little apprentice happily eating sorghum fruit. When he entered, King Ian's eyes sparkled as he looked up at him. His face has regained its whiteness, with red fruit juice still sticking to his lips, looking quite attractive. Chu Hinian also looks at him, silently counting to himself, 1, 2. Sure enough, before he could count to 3, King Yan had already stood up, gently nestled into his arms, and affectionately rubbed against his neck before putting a piece of fruit in his mouth. Chu Hinian opened his mouth and ate the fruit. He hugged King Yan's waist, kissed his fingertips still stained with juice, and then kissed his lips stained with fruit juice. Puckering his lips, King Yan said, "More." Chu Hinian chuckled, lowered his head, and kissed him tenderly. After kissing, King Yan looked satisfied, like a fox spirit soaking up the sun. Licking his lips, he left Chu Hinian's embrace contentedly. Chu Hinian quickly washed up, changed his robe, and together they dished out the food from the pot, sitting at the table chatting while eating. King Yan mentioned that they found a lot of sorghum fruit on the hillside today. He and Qi Yunyang have already remembered the location and planned to go pick more in a few days. He also mentioned that they gave Li Sheng a large bowl of sorghum fruit. When he went to her house, she was busy cooking the flower buds they recently gathered, looking quite happy. It seems Lan Jie hasn't told her about that matter yet. They talked back and forth like reporting to each other. Chu Hinian also talked about what ironware he forged today and how much money he made. Little Zhuang's younger siblings came to the shop today and brought pickled vegetables made by little Zhuang's mother. In the end, there was nothing more important to discuss, just miscellaneous chatter, but both were quite happy. King Yan was cheerful, and Chu Hinian's lips occasionally curled into a smile. After finishing their meal, King Yan took out the bowl of chilled sorghum fruit soaked in sugar water. They each took a spoon and enjoyed it, refreshingly cold, sweet, and sour, much better than the taste of commercially sold ice and snow. 2 days later, Lu Fa's daughter-in-law came to their house in a hurry, borrowing 5 catties of white flour from King Yan without even sitting down. She said their household was running short of flour and would buy more the next day to repay her. King Yan asked curiously, "What urgent matter brought you here?" Lu Fa's daughter-in-law sighed and said, "It's that relative we mentioned last time." The trading caravan that was supposed to return in a month hadn't arrived yet, but the relatives Lu's family had said would come in 2 months unexpectedly arrived early. According to Lu Fa's daughter-in-law, they had already set the date in their letter, but those relatives quietly set off early, catching Lu's family unprepared with nothing ready. "Well, since they've come, we have to figure out how to settle them. There's no time to make a table full of dishes, so we'll just make a batch of pork and green onion dumplings for them. With so many people, we can make them quickly," Lu Fa's daughter-in-law said as she was already leaving. She turned back and said, "All right, no need to see me off. You hurry back inside. I have to get back to work. We still don't know where this bunch of people will sleep tonight." Sigh. King Yan knew about this. Lu Fa sought help from the village head and borrowed an old vacant house in the village. Although the house was old, it was still sturdy. Lu Fa had someone repair it, and within a few days, the family arrived. Now Lu's family was busy every day with the tofu shop's work. On top of that, they had a pregnant daughter-in-law to worry about and these relatives who have come from afar. It must not be easy for them. In the evening, King Yan mentioned this to Chu Hinian, suggesting they should bring some things over to take a look tomorrow. Chu Hinian pondered for a moment and said, "It seems those relatives may not be easy to get along with. Just go over to visit, there's no need to get too close." King Ian nodded and said, "Okay." The next day, King Ian carried a basket of sorghum fruit he had picked to Lu's house. As soon as he entered the courtyard, he was stunned. There was a large cart in the yard with things still unpacked on it, and scattered items on the ground. Xi Yinglan happened to be sitting in the yard. When she saw him, she straightened her slightly bulging belly, grabbed his hand, and said, "Big brother King Ian, you're here. Come inside quickly." King Ian smiled and said, "I picked a basket of sorghum fruit for you all to try." Xi Yinglan happily took the basket and said, "We were just craving this. The fruit you picked is really good, so fresh." Once inside, King Ian understood why Yinglan was sitting in the yard. The house was also filled with a lot of stuff, with bags open and things scattered all over. When Lu Fa's daughter-in-law saw him, she hurriedly asked him to sit down. They exchanged a few words, and then 2 brothers who looked very alike came out from the neighboring room. The taller one, The elder brother was named Lu Yong. The younger, more delicate-looking one was named Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng's eyes lit up when he saw the basket of sorghum fruit. He looked at King Yin and said, "Is this handsome brother giving the sorghum fruit to me?" King Yin hesitated for a moment, glanced at Lu Fa's embarrassed daughter-in-law, and smiled awkwardly. "Let's all eat it together." Lu Sheng said eagerly, "Then my brother and I will wash them and bring them over to share." Saying that, he and his brother, who was staring blankly at King Yin, carried the basket out of the house and washed it in the yard. King Yin lowered his voice and asked Lu Fa's daughter-in-law, "How did they spend the night yesterday?" Lu Fa's daughter-in-law sighed, "They wanted to stay in Yinglin's house. I stopped them and let Lu Fa and I sleep on the floor of the tofu shop's house, letting them stay in this house." After a while, Lu Sheng and his brother returned after washing up. They placed the basket on the Kang, heated brick bed, took off their shoes, and sat cross-legged next to the basket. They began to eat the fruit one by one and even called their brother over to join them. Lu Fa's daughter-in-law looked at them with a displeased expression, and Qi Yinglin bit her lip, looking unhappy. At this moment, a middle-aged couple came in from outside. They looked to be around 40 years old and were the parents of the twins. The man was named Lu Yufu, and the woman was named Zhang Ju. They greeted King Yin politely before going back inside. King Yin felt it was about time to leave and bid farewell. As he left, he glanced at the brothers. They had already picked through and eaten most of the large basket of sorghum fruit. What was left was already too ripe after being washed, not suitable for further eating. As he left, King Yin heard Lu Sheng say to Qi Yinglin, "Sister-in-law, hurry and eat. I've saved the best ones for you." When he returned home, King Yin saw Lan Jie's daughter playing alone in the neighboring courtyard. The door didn't block the sounds of crying and soft consolation from inside the house. Li Sheng's crying wasn't loud and heart-wrenching but muffled and intermittent, making anyone who heard it feel uneasy. Finally, Qin Lan had told her mother. King Yin hesitated for a moment but decided not to go over. It was better to let Lan Jie and Li Sheng's mother and daughter have a good talk. The next day, King Yin went to the blacksmith's shop. Xiao Zhuang's family sending over pickled vegetables reminded King Yin that he should also prepare some delicious food to take to the apprentices at the shop when he had time. When he arrived at the shop, Chu Henian was out getting supplies and hadn't returned yet. It was already close to noon, so King Yin took out a plate of dumplings from the food basket and served them hot to Xiao Zhuang first. The dumplings were filled with pork and chives, each containing a shrimp, making them fresh and fragrant. Xiao Zhuang ate with his eyes narrowed in delight, the flavors making his mouth oil up. One plate wasn't enough, so King Yin served him another half plate, and only then was Xiao Zhuang satisfied. After finishing his meal, Xiao Zhuang even knew to take the empty plate, clean it with water, and return it to his master. Once they were done eating, the two sat at the door chatting. Xiao Zhuang said, "Yesterday, there was a strange man and woman who came by. They didn't even ask about the ironwork, they just stood at the door pretending to casually watch my master. After staring for a long time, they left. But when we were closing up, they came back and quietly asked me about the robbery that happened at your place last time." King Yin looked at him in surprise and asked, "Why did they ask about that?" Xiao Zhuang scratched his head. "I don't know either. At first, I thought they were just curious, but they didn't seem very interested in the matter. They just kept asking me how much money my master brought back from the county office." King Yin furrowed his brow and asked, "What did you tell them?" "I really didn't know anything about it," Xiao Zhuang replied. "I told them I didn't know, but they started guessing randomly. At one point, they asked if I had a few copper coins, and then they shook their heads and said it couldn't be so little if someone was facing execution. Then they asked if I had 100 taels. They kept pestering me until I casually said it was 100 taels, and only then did they leave." Hearing this, King Yin became worried. There had been a theft at his house before, and he was quite sensitive about it. He wondered if someone was targeting his family again. He hurriedly asked, "What do those two look like? Describe them to me." Xiao Zhuang thought for a moment and described them to him. King Yin listened attentively and vaguely felt something familiar. After a while, he remembered. The man and woman Xiao Zhuang described sounded very similar to the new relatives who had recently moved in with Lu's family. Could they be the same people? King Ian bit his lip, pondering. He couldn't understand what these two people were up to. According to Xiao Zhuang, those two only came to the shop after he had visited Lu's house. They might have heard about the theft from Lu's family or other villagers, prompting them to come and inquire. But the whole situation seemed suspicious. Who would come specifically to ask about a theft out of mere curiosity, especially when there were so many unresolved things at home? Thinking it over and over, he couldn't come up with an answer. At that moment, a tall figure pushed a heavy cart of pig iron back from outside. King Ian quickly got up, took a cloth, and went over to wipe the sweat from Chu Henian's forehead. Chu Henian had a hard time pushing the cart all the way back. When he saw King Ian, his expression remained unchanged, but there was a faint joy in his eyes. Xiao Zhuang hurried over to help his master unload the cart. King Ian returned to the house and heated up the dumplings he had left using the shop's iron pot. Once the work was done, Chu Henian washed up and sat down to eat. Xiao Zhuang attentively poured him a bowl of strong alcohol. Chu Henian usually didn't drink much, only occasionally with Lu Fa and the others. Drinking in the shop was mostly when he returned from getting supplies, the drink helping to relieve fatigue. Curious, King Ian picked up a bowl and took a sip. The fiery liquid spread from his mouth down his throat and into his stomach like a burning flame, painful and choking. Chu Henian quickly brought him water to drink. After finishing, King Ian teared up. He stood up out of habit, intending to sit on the other's thigh, but realized this wasn't home and felt embarrassed, but Chu Henian hugged him tightly before he could move. "Someone's here," King Ian mumbled, covering his face. Chu Henian slowly stroked his leg to comfort him, whispering softly in his ear, "No one's here. Xiao Zhuang has sharp eyes. He just went out." Chapter 50. Chu Henian held King Ian like that and gently patted him, soothing him. King Ian's temperament was gentle on the outside but strong on the inside. Although he appeared delicate and beautiful, he would shed tears at the slightest pain and seek his husband's sympathy by snuggling up to him. During intimate nights, he would cry like a person made of water, begging for mercy and acting coquettishly. When he couldn't bear it anymore and all his pleas were futile, tears would stream down his face. He would rub his wet face against his husband's face like a little animal, with his warm and rapid breath tickling his husband's face, causing it to itch slightly. King Ian didn't know that at such moments, the uncontrollable beast within his heart became even more frantic. Eventually, when King Ian couldn't bear the pain of being pinched on his wrist, he would temporarily regain his composure, briefly restraining himself with all his willpower in the ultimate satisfaction, and then continue to lose himself. King Ian cried easily but was also very capable. He could manage affairs both inside and outside the home exceptionally well. Despite his tender appearance, he was extremely efficient in his work. If he couldn't do something, he wouldn't pretend he could do it and would seek alternative solutions. He knew how to empathize and could be compassionate. He handled all the personal relationships in the family, dealt with matters thoughtfully, and was warm-hearted, making relatives and friends alike fond of him. When King Ian snuggled up to him, Chu Henian thought this way. After being comforted, King Ian felt much better. He returned to his original low stool and continued eating dumplings with Chu Henian. Before long, Xiao Zhuang peeked inside cautiously. King Ian waved at him and called him in. Xiao Zhuang's face and neck turned red. He felt extremely embarrassed and entered the room with lowered head and dragging steps. King Ian asked him, "What's the matter?" Xiao Zhuang hesitated for a while before saying with effort, "I didn't mean to disturb master and mistress. It's just that it's scorching hot at noon, and I couldn't bear it." King Ian burst into laughter all of a sudden, and Chu Henian also raised his hand and lightly patted Xiao Zhuang on the back of his head with a smile. King Ian took out 2 copper coins from his purse and handed them to Xiao Zhuang, saying, "This is from mistress to compensate you. Go buy some ice or something cold to eat." Xiao Zhuang's eyes lit up. He glanced at his master, saw no objection, thanked King Ian, took the coins, and was about to run out. Halfway, he turned back and asked, "Should I come back after buying it?" Chu Henian pretended to kick him, and Xiao Zhuang swiftly and flexibly ran off. After Xiao Zhuang left, Chu Henian finished eating. Together, they cleaned up the plates and bowls. Just after eating, King Ian suggested giving Chu Henian a shoulder and back massage, which Chu Henian agreed to. The two sat on a low stool while King Yin stood behind Chu Hinian. Chu Hinian's muscles were not overly bulging but were perfectly slender and well-defined, shaped by hard work. They were firm and honest, making it quite a challenge for King Yin to knead them. Eventually, he had to use his elbows. As they chatted and massaged, King Yin mentioned what Xiao Zhuang had told him about Lu Fa's relatives. After hearing this, Chu Hinian said, I noticed them yesterday and thought they were from the town. So it was them. King Yin murmured in agreement and said, we've gathered enough money at home. Once we visit the bank, and since you've just brought in supplies, there isn't much money left at home. We don't have to worry about such incidents happening again. Chu Hinian thought for a moment and said, during these days, visit Aunt Chu and Aunt Li more often. Lock the door when you're home alone. Don't go to Lu Fa's house for the time being. Whenever I have time, I'll go back home to check on things. King Yin agreed. After a while, Chu Hinian added, I'll consider whether we should discuss this with Lu Fa. Shaking his head, King Yin said, let's wait and see. I don't know what they're up to, and bringing this up to Brother Lu now might put him in a difficult position. Chu Hinian and Xiao Zhuang got busy again, so King Yin carried the food basket and headed home. Once home, he tidied up the food basket, fed the chicks in the house, washed his hands, and took out the dough he had prepared before going out. It had risen quite a bit due to the hot weather at noon. King Yin kneaded the dough again, steamed a pot of sugar buns with red sugar. After the buns were steamed, he kept a few for himself, wrapped the rest while still hot in a cloth-covered tray, put them in a basket, and carried them to Aunt Li's house. It was Chinlan who opened the door for King Yin. She had stayed over last night, and King Yin could see she hadn't slept well with her pale face and red eyes. I just steamed a pot of sugar buns, and I thought Nyanyan would like them, so I brought some for her, King Yin said. Chinlan thanked him and let him in. Nyanyan was squatting in the outer room, playing and drawing on a low stool. Steam was rising from the stove, and the medicinal smell was strong. Aunt Li's room door was tightly shut. Chinlan washed her hands and peeled off a sugar bun for Nyanyan to eat. She occasionally took a bite herself and sighed, I haven't had time to eat my lunch. These sugar buns came just in time. King Yin glanced at Aunt Li's closed door and asked quietly, have you talked to her? Chinlan nodded and sighed deeply. She cried for half a day. Every time I think about it, I want to cry. She nearly collapsed this morning. I've asked for a doctor. After taking the medicine, she slept. King Yin said, the caravan is about to return. What does Auntie think? Chinlan lowered her eyelids and shook her head. She's still overwhelmed for a while, just crying and refusing to say anything. She paused, then looked up and added, they say family matters shouldn't be aired publicly, but you and Hinian are not outsiders. So I'm telling you everything. I want my father to come back. If his official position can't be resigned, we can find a way to spend some money and transfer him back. As for that concubine, we should offer more money for her settlement. If she wants to remarry, let her. If not, with a sum of money, she can live well enough. If my mother doesn't want to see that child, I can take care of him. After all, our family can afford one more mouth to feed. King Yin looked at Chinlan, remaining silent for a while. Chinlan glanced at him, lowered her head, and choked up. Do you think what I'm doing is inappropriate? Do you think I'm forcing my mother to compromise? But he is my father. When he disappeared, I was already so grown up. I have deep feelings for him. In those years, he treated me, his daughter, with great affection. As a father, he didn't do anything wrong. Moreover, this situation can't be blamed on him. After all, he lost his memory and doesn't remember us, mother and daughter. King Yin shook his head and sighed, that's not what I meant. Chinlan smiled bitterly, our village is poor, that's why there aren't many men taking concubines. Look at the town or even the county, wealthy households have secondary wives and concubines, and they visit brothels from time to time. Even my father-in-law had concubines in the past, but he was in poor health, so he stopped early. Men are like this. My mother will understand, Chinlan concluded. 2 days later, King Yin stewed a pot of braised pork and took it to add dishes for the master and disciple in the shop. As he was halfway there, he saw that the old house borrowed by Lu Fa's family seemed to have been repaired. People were moving things in and out, and it was Lu Yufu and Jiang Ju's family. The village was usually quiet with few fresh events, so some idle elderly men, women, and young wives came out to watch the excitement and gossip when they saw them moving. Lu Yufu worked silently, while Jiang Ju stood at the courtyard gate and told nearby neighbors, "Back when they sought refuge with us, my family's old Lu spared no effort. It's just that our family was poor and couldn't make things too comfortable, right? These Lu brothers, they're so stingy even though they're dripping with wealth. Lu Kai and his wife, just the two of them living in such a big house, while my family of four has to move into this dilapidated house. Shouldn't people have a conscience? How does that saying go again? When repaying the kindness of a drop of water, one should think of its source. What they're doing to my family is just heartless," she continued. The neighbors nearby listened with amusement, covering their mouths and chuckling. Jiang Ju added, "Hey, look at my Lu Yong and Lu Sheng, they're not young anymore. Lu Yong is 19 this year, and it's time. If anyone knows of a suitable match, please let us know." A well-meaning neighbor asked, "What kind of person are you looking for them?" Rolling her eyes, Jiang Ju replied, "My Lu Yong is honest and modest, while Lu Sheng is obedient and good-looking. At the very least, we should find someone better off than Lu Fa's family." The neighbor chuckled and said, "All right, we'll inquire around for you." Jiang Ju seemed to want to say something more, but at that moment, Lu Fa and Lu Kai, the two brothers, drove their ox cart back with more things. Seeing them, Jiang Ju's expression immediately changed. She greeted them warmly, asking after their well-being repeatedly, smiling with many creases on her face, completely different from how she had just talked behind their backs. After thinking for a moment, King Yan turned around, bypassed her house, and took another route. As late August arrived, the weather began to cool completely, even at noon. King Ian replaced the cool mats and pillows on the beds at home, cleaned them, dried them, and put them away. Chu Hinian and Yao went to town and brought back a large cart of coal and coal slag, sharing it with Aunt Li's family. Aunt Li wanted to give them some money for their hard work, but they didn't accept it. Instead, she cut 2 large pieces of pork back fat and sent them to their homes respectively. King Ian saw that Aunt Li's illness was getting better and she was energetic, which relieved him a little. During this period, whenever King Ian had free time, he went to her house to accompany her, chat with her, and help with chores. He didn't mention the imminent arrival of Qin Liang Chuan, only discussing making perfumes and snowflake ointments. Aunt Li's eyes lit up when they talked about these things, and her spirits improved a lot. During these days, King Ian and Chuniong went to town to set up stalls a few times. The 2 items made by Aunt Li were starting to gain popularity in the market. Zihen's snowflake ointment and Zihen's perfume became popular items in the small-scale market in town. Taking advantage of this, King Ian also promoted the name of Qingqing's beauty and grocery shop and established a one-stop shop concept. Whatever people wanted to buy, whatever was popular, they could find it at his stall. Girls and young men who loved beauty couldn't help but stop by his stall. King Ian saved up all the money he earned, depositing it as soon as he had enough. As the autumn harvest approached, Chu Hinian's blacksmith shop also became busy, with business coming in every day. The 2 of them earned money sporadically like this, eating simple meals most of the time, occasionally treating themselves to something delicious, and buying clothes and necessities when needed. Occasionally, they would splurge a bit, but always within their means. The weather had turned cooler. During the day it was still bearable, but at night they needed to burn a little coal to warm the house. Just 1 stove was enough. Before going to sleep, they covered it with coal slag, letting it burn slowly throughout the night, making the house quite comfortable, and finally allowing them to sleep well. It was barely dark when the commotion under the bed curtains started again. King Ian didn't let him touch again, covering himself with a blanket and whispering softly, "We just did it a few days ago, not tonight." Chu Hinian asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" King Ian blushed, lifted the blanket and his underclothes, showing the man his lower abdomen. Chu Hinian propped himself up and leaned over, looking for a while before saying, "It's red." King Ian nodded, "I heard from other guys in the village that if it's also red when you're not in the mood, it means it's easy to conceive. It turned red several times during the day when you weren't around." Chu Hinian didn't insist, leaned over and kissed him, then removed his wrist guard and lay down to calm himself. King Ian felt a little guilty. After thinking about it, he buried himself under the covers. The covers were raised high. Chu Hinian rested one hand on his forehead, covering his eyes, trying hard to restrain his desire to turn over and push down the person below. A long time passed, and the person under the covers managed to hold on. Finally, after finishing, a cough came from inside the covers. Chu Hinian hadn't recovered yet and quickly sat up, lifting the covers hastily. Under the covers, the beautiful face was pale with a touch of red, eyes moist, lips rosy, with white traces still lingering. Chu Hinian placed his palm under his chin and said, "Spit it out." King Ian looked at him with complaints, almost crying, pouting and mumbling, "I swallowed it all."